The road not taken. Christine_Harriet_01. Summary. Ned Stark is imprisoned, and his son Robb Stark is determined to rescue him. As he confronts the brutal might of the Lannisters, Robb grapples with the immense weight of leadership and the responsibilities that come with it. His first daunting challenge arises from Walder Frey, who insists that Robb marry one of his daughters without delay. Forced into an arranged marriage with Roslyn Frey, Robb Stark faces an uncertain future. Will their union blossom into love, or remain a mere alliance born of political necessity? A canon-divergent story, exploring a world where Robb is forced to marry Roslyn Frey before continuing to King's Landing to free Ned. Current plans are for this to span the time from Robert Baratheon's death to Daenerys' return to Westeros. Chapter 1, Catelyn I. Chapter text. Act 1. Catelyn I. Robb Stark stood with a furrowed brow, his gaze locked onto the detailed map sprawled before him. The path to King's Landing, marked with winding routes and treacherous terrain, was more than just a route, it was the path to his father's freedom. Each time he traced the road with his finger, the looming shadow of the Freys loomed larger. Their formidable toll for crossing the bridge was a block he couldn't afford to lose any more time at. Every alternative he considered would grind their march to a crawl, jeopardizing any chance of rescuing his father or his sisters. The war room buzzed with overwhelming noise as northern lords engaged in heated debate. Voices clashed over the next move, some clamoring for retribution against Walder Frey for his failure to answer Edmure Tully's call, others urging caution to avoid the Freys altogether. The only other person who seemed to be as quiet and thoughtful as Robb was his mother. Lady Catelyn Stark sat silently, her eyes reflecting the same troubled contemplation as her son. Finally, her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Robb, what are you willing to give to cross?" Lady Catelyn's question fell heavy in the air, bringing the room's discord to an abrupt halt as every gaze shifted to their young lord. "Everything," Robb replied firmly, though his mother could see the tremor of fear beneath his hard exterior. The lords' murmurings swelled again, the room echoing with renewed disputes over Robb's decision. "We don't have the luxury of searching for another route to King's Landing. This is our only option." He slammed the wooden wolf emblem down on the map, right atop the marked location of the twins, silencing the room once more. "Are you sure?" "Walder Frey doesn't make light demands," Lady Catelyn said, her eyes meeting Robb's with a penetrating gaze. "Mother, there is no other choice," Robb insisted. "Walder Frey will have his demands, and I'm prepared to meet them. There is no price too large to save father and the girls." A murmur of surprise swept through the lords before the room once again falling into chaos. Roose Bolton's voice cut through the noise, practical and sharp. "Who will speak with Lord Frey? I know you likely wish to go yourself, but we need a plan for what comes next in King's Landing if things go awry. There is no next if we cannot cross this bridge. We cannot reach King's Landing without Walder Frey," Robb snapped. "I'll go," Catelyn said, rising from her chair. "I've known Walder Frey since I was a girl. Perhaps he will respond better to a Tully than a Stark." She offered her son a reassuring smile, though she was unsure if it would comfort him. With a determined nod, she departed the tent to confront the old lord. A small escort of soldiers accompanied Catelyn to the imposing stronghold of House Frey. The large wooden doors groaned open, their eerie creaks echoing her fear. The grand hall beyond was as cold and unwelcoming as she had worried. Despite the number of Frey offspring, the room was eerily silent, save for the figure of Lord Walder Frey seated in a grand chair with only a young frail and thin girl by his side. Catelyn curtsied deeply before the withered lord, her heart heavy with apprehension. Walder Frey's smile, wide and unsettling, revealed a few remaining golden teeth. "Lady Stark," he greeted, his voice tinged with a childlike glee, despite his advanced age. "Lord Frey," Catelyn replied, striving to keep her voice calm and respectful as she rose to meet his eyes. "To what do I owe this pleasure?" His gaze lingered over her in a way that made Catelyn deeply uncomfortable, even though his young wife sat uncomfortably beside him. "Surely you know of my son's journey south," Catelyn began. "And you wish me to open my gates to your young wolf?" Walder Frey's eyes narrowed, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "It is the fastest route south, my lord," Catelyn confirmed. "You must understand, I'll require something in return," Walder Frey said, his fingers tightening possessively around the waist of his young bride. "I have come to hear your demands on behalf of my son. What is it that you want?" Catelyn asked, bracing herself for the inevitable. I have a great many daughters, granddaughters, and even great-granddaughters. Too many, if you ask me. I need to dispose of a few. You want Robb to marry one of them? Catelyn guessed, and a satisfied grin spread across the old lord's face. He may choose as he likes, though I must warn you, they're not the prettiest bunch. If he picks an ugly one, he can select another to warm his bed. Free cackled. My son will have one wife and he will be faithful. The Starks value loyalty above all else, Catelyn said firmly. I don't care about his loyalty, I've always found it overrated. Just give me a Stark grandson, and then he can send her to live with the wildlings for all I care, Walder Free replied dismissively. I promise to you upon my honor as a Stark and as a Tully that, upon our return to Winterfell, Robb will marry one of your daughters, Catelyn vowed. Oh no, Free laughed mirthlessly. I don't trust you'll return. If he survives this campaign, he will become a young man high on the thrill of battle, with girls falling at his feet. What will he care for an oath made between an old man and a woman? But as you say, loyalty is above all for the Starks, he will marry her before making the crossing. But he must cross quickly. Catelyn pleaded. Then he better choose swiftly, Lord Free retorted, his tone final. Understanding the futility of further argument, Catelyn resigned herself to the situation. Very well. Now. Free bellowed, startling her. I'll spare you the sight of the whole ugly lot. My young wife will fetch the girls who are suitable for the great Stark Lord. Which ones, my lord? Lady Free, barely past her teens, asked timidly. Alex, Walder, and Roslyn Free replied, his gaze fixed on Catelyn. Which Walder? Catelyn inquired. The buxom one, Walton's girl. Free snapped, turning to his wife. The young woman hurried off, almost tripping over her skirts. And bring tighter. I have need for her, Free added. Once the young woman left, Free's eyes turned back to Catelyn. Now, my other demands. Your son will take my son Oliver as his squire and 2 young boys will be sent to Winterfell as wards. I believe Robb will agree to these terms, Catelyn started before Free interrupted. You will help these boys find wives, and you, Lady Stark, will take my daughter Tighter as your personal companion. I've given up trying to marry her off, she's too old for children. But should a northern lord lose a wife at 40 and need someone to manage his household and warm his bed, I expect you to recommend Tighter. Catelyn nodded, as Lord Free continued, and will the young wolf be choosing his bride himself? I presume he will wish to pick his own wife, Catelyn said with resolve, and what choices he will have, the old lord sneered. Turning to one of her son's men, she instructed, inform Robb of what has transpired and the choice he must make. He is needed here. The man nodded and hurried out, picking up his pace at Lord Free's mocking comment. Better turn that walk into a run. Ah. Here they are, my gems, Free announced as 3 girls appeared. Catelyn felt a pang of relief as she saw that the 3 young women were indeed quite lovely, a small mercy in an otherwise grim situation. This is Alex, my granddaughter, nearing her 16th name day. Free introduced the first girl, who curtsied gracefully. Her face was adorned with freckles, and her dark brown hair fell just past her shoulders. She had high cheekbones and deep blue eyes, she looked very young. Walder, another granddaughter, just turned 17. The second girl curtsied deeply. Taller than her cousin, she had a more womanly figure and blonde hair that contrasted sharply with the darker tones of her kin. Her beauty was undeniable and would surely appeal to many. And finally, Roslyn, my daughter, who has just turned 16. The shortest girl stepped forward, she was dainty and her pale skin almost made her look like one of Sansa's clay dolls. Her features matched this claim, she had a delicate nose and large brown eyes. She curtsied to Catelyn before standing up and greeting her. It is an honor, Lady Stark. As she spoke, Catelyn noticed a small gap between her 2 front teeth that added to her features, whereas in other girls it would have drawn all of the focus. Her mahogany-colored hair reached the bottom of her back and had slight curls at the bottom. And this is Tighter, Free concluded, introducing an older woman, perhaps close to 25. Though not as slender as the younger girls, Tighter's demeanor suggested a quiet strength that Catelyn felt would serve her well in Winterfell. Tighter will move to Winterfell as Lady Stark's companion. While one of you girls will marry Robb Stark, Lord Free added. Caitlin observed the girl's reactions. Rosalind's eyes widened, though her emotions remained controlled, while the youngest, Alex, visibly trembled. The room's oppressive atmosphere made it clear that their fate was not to be taken lightly. "You've seen them, now piss off to your son, and tell me when he's decided." Caitlin merely tipped her head to him and began to walk to the door, and the girls left the room the way they had come. Just as she reached the door, she was met with the face of the messenger she had sent for Robb. "Lord Stark has been delayed by Lord Bolton," he informed her. "He has asked that you use your experience to choose the most suitable bride." Chapter 2, Roslyn I. Chapter text. Roslyn I. Roslyn led the two other girls down the dimly lit corridor that connected the great hall to the rest of the twins. She tried to project an air of grace and dignity, though her heart raced with apprehension. Throughout her childhood, she had dreamed of a gallant knight coming to rescue her from the confines of her father's control. Yet as she matured, that dream had turned darker, as reality set in that her future husband was more likely to be someone who might be more interested in her as a pawn than as a cherished and loved wife. But now, the possibility of marrying into House Stark felt like being saved by a prince, a glimmer of hope in her uncertain world. As the heavy oak door of the great hall closed behind them, Alex burst into tears. The younger girl's sobs echoed in the narrow passageway, and Roslyn quickly moved to support her, holding her up as she crumpled to the floor. "What a baby," Wilder said dismissively, undoing her bodice and doing it up again tighter in order to push her tits up. "Leave her be, Wilder," Roslyn snapped, gently helping Alex to her feet. "But Ro, I don't want to marry or be a wife or have children, not yet at least," Alex managed between sobs, her voice quivering with fear and despair. At 15, Alex was nearing her 16th name day but remained emotionally immature, sheltered for too long by her controlling and overprotective father, Roslyn's brother Simond. She was physically ready for marriage but mentally still a child. "Well, the Starks won't want a child for Lady of Winterfell," Wilder said, smoothing her dress with practiced nonchalance. "Well, I've seen many of my sisters and nieces sold and bought under this roof. I'm sure a house as prominent as the Starks will want someone who hasn't lost their maidenhood. From what's been said about you and Black Walder, I think father has more chance of becoming Lady Stark than you," Roslyn retorted, defending the distressed Alex. "Girls, stop your bickering. Lord Stark cannot meet you all, so Lady Stark will be making the choice herself. She wants to see you again, now." Stephen, Roslyn's eldest brother, said as he entered from the great hall. The girls fell into silence, almost not registering what he had said. "Move," he shouted, holding the door open for the girls. Wilder strode ahead, making sure to push her chest out when she walked, while Roslyn took Alex's trembling hand, guiding her carefully through the hall. The sight of Lady Stark waiting in the center of the room, her demeanor calm yet commanding, made Roslyn's nerves tingle. Her father was nowhere to be seen. The three girls curtsied deeply before Lady Stark. Roslyn held her head high, meeting Caitlin's gaze. The middle-aged woman's eyes softened with a smile as she took in the sight of the girls. "Hello again," Lady Stark said in a soothing tone. "My son regrets that he cannot be here, preoccupied as he is with his war council. We do not have the luxury of time, so I wish to get to know each of you and ultimately I will decide which of you will wed my son." She approached Wilder first. "Please remind me of your name." "I am Wilder, though many call me Fair Wilder." "I am the great-granddaughter of Lord Freythrough," his son Stephen Wilder responded, her voice pitched unnaturally high, clearly an attempt to sound more appealing. "And what do you enjoy doing in your free time, Lady Wilder?" Lady Stark inquired, her gaze steady and unmoved by the girl's attempt to impress. "I sew and knit, and I enjoy spending time with family and praying to the Seven," Wilder said, her smile so forced it seemed almost painful. Roslyn stifled a laugh, well aware that Wilder had never picked up a needle in her life and that her supposed piety was as thin as her smile. Lady Stark nodded politely and moved to Roslyn. "And you are, Lady Roslyn?" "Yes, Lady Stark, Lord Walder's daughter." Roslyn dipped slightly as she spoke into a slight curtsy. "And what do you do?" Roslyn declared. "I mostly look after the younger children, my lady." "And Roslyn dances, she has the most beautiful singing voice, you should hear her sing. She sews, she made my dress, oh and she paints as well," Alex Free pronounced, overwhelmed by the excitement that Roslyn might be getting married, forgetting that she was in the same position. Lady Stark chuckled softly, her gaze shifting to the youngest girl, who had sunk into a childlike pose. At that moment, the heavy wooden doors creaked open, and Lord Free stormed in. "Alex Free," he bellowed. "Stand up straight, girl." The once vibrant Alex now appeared overwhelmed, her tears flowing freely. "Grandfather, please, I don't want to marry yet," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Lord Free's face contorted with rage. He raised his hand to strike Alex, and Lady Stark looked away. Roslin, acting on instinct, intervened, grabbing her father's arm to stop him. He struggled free and slapped Roslin across the face, sending her sprawling to the floor. "You insignificant bitch!" Lord Free roared. "I offer you a chance to be the Lady of the North, and you repay me like this." Roslin remained on the floor, fighting back her own tears, not wanting to anger her father anymore. It wasn't irregular for Roslin to face the wrath of her father. Walder adjusted his shirt before walking around the girl and throwing himself down on his chair. Lady Stark approached Roslin, offering her a hand with a look of sympathy. "Lord Free, I have made my decision," she said firmly, locking eyes with Roslin and ignoring the frail lord. "On behalf of my son, Robb Stark, will you, Roslin of House Free, give your hand in marriage?" Roslin, shocked by the situation, timidly replied, "If you think that Lord Stark will have me." Lord Free's smile widened. "We expect you in the September in 1 hour," he said to Caitlin, before turning to his daughter and stroking gently the red mark that had appeared on her face. "Find a suitable dress, we want the young lord pleased with his mother's choice." Caitlin curtsied deeply, and as Roslin was hurriedly escorted out by her brother Stephen, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of disbelief and relief. In the courtyard, Roslin ran after her brother. "Pawin. Ro. I heard about your marriage. You're finally escaping this place, to somewhere where you'll be treated as you deserve," Pawin said, taking her in a warm embrace. "We can escape together. Father has offered to send a small company with the Stark army. If you befriend Lord Stark, you might convince him to let you stay at Winterfell," Roslin suggested, her face a mix of hope and concern. "Oh, Ro, you don't have to worry. I'll be glad to get away from here for as long as the Stark campaign lasts," he said, a worried smile touching his lips. "I have one more request." "Will you give me away?" Roslin asked. With so many Freys, it was difficult to be close to all of them. Pawin had always been her protector, and she wanted him by her side. "I would love to," Pawin said, pulling her into another hug. "And I have a wedding gift for you." He led her up to a storage room in one of the towers. "Close your eyes," he instructed. Roslin obeyed, listening to the opening of chests before he said, "Okay, open them." Roslin opened her eyes to find Pawin holding a delicate white dress. It was adorned with lace sleeves and a lace-patterned bodice and skirt. "Is that Mother's?" she began. "Yes, her wedding dress," Pawin confirmed. "I found it after she died when Father sent her belongings up here. I had hoped to give it to you when you were betrothed, but I'll admit this is sooner than I expected." She embraced her brother, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. To think I'll no longer be a Free by sunset tonight." "We must hurry then," Pawin said, his voice urgent as he led her back down the stairs. "Why the rush, Pawin? Slow down," Roslin called out, laughing as they went. "Come on. The girls will want to see you before the ceremony," he replied, dashing toward the east wing. Roslin decided to leave the dress in her room for now. When she entered, she found her youngest sister, Arwen, waiting. The room was lined with 10 thin beds that once had been filled by the many daughters of House Free, but as the girls had married the room had grown empty until the only people left in it were Taita and Roslin, whilst the younger girls occupied the next 2 rooms along the wing. "Ro. Alex just told us." "Congratulations!" Arwen exclaimed. "Thank you, Arwen," Roslin said, her heart swelling with emotion. "Was that your mother's dress?" Arwen asked. Roslin just nodded, as she ran her hands down the lace sleeves, imaging what her mother had looked like wearing it. Her mother had died just a few months after Roslin had been born. She had only known her mother through stories told by Pawin and her other brothers. "Come on, Ro. Get changed. I want to do your hair," Arwen said, her excitement palpable. Roslin looked at the dress, feeling unworthy of wearing it. "I'll help you," Taita offered, stepping into the room. Her look of joy dimmed when she saw Rosalind's anxiety. Taita, though only 13 years older than Rosalind, had been a motherly figure throughout her life. Most of Rosalind's other sisters had left young to marry various lords across Westeros. She was grateful that Taita would be coming with her north, but knew that one day she too would be married and would have to leave her as well. The girls continued in silence and Rosalind slipped into the dress. The atmosphere around the sisters was filled with care. They didn't have to speak to show how much they loved each other. The silence was broken as various young girls burst into the room, some armed with hairbrushes, others with powder, each ready to gently attack the bride. "You look so pretty," Romarissa said, brushing her hair. "After what I did to father, I thought Lady Stark would choose Walder," Rosalind said, her voice heavy with regret. "Walder is a brat, it's not hard to see. One day she will have a bastard and father will cast her out as a disappointment," Taita said from her bed. She had begun to gather her things and for a moment Rosalind was confused before realizing that Taita was packing. "Taita, could you also pack my belongings? I won't be returning here tonight, and I'm unsure how quickly we'll leave tomorrow." Taita nodded with a reassuring smile. She moved to the shared wardrobe and began to carefully select Rosalind's dresses, folding them into neat piles. "I'll set aside your finest nightgown for the room father has prepared for you and Lord Stark. I'll pack the rest," Taita said, her smile warm and steady as she continued her task. As Taita worked, Aowen stepped in and started to braid the top half of Rosalind's hair into a neat bun, letting the rest cascade down her back. After finishing with Rosalind, the girls quickly got dressed into a variety of old formal dresses, likely saved from the last free wedding, before leaving and going to the September, leaving Rosalind alone. The door creaked open, revealing Pawin standing in the doorway. He had changed into a crisp white shirt and a grey overcoat, having shaved the patchy remnants of his beard, something that might have made Rosalind laugh under different circumstances. In his hands, he held a grey cloak adorned with the emblem of the twins, a piece of heirloom fabric. It had been made by her father's first bride Pera and had been resewn every 10 years or so and now resembled a tatty blanket. "It's time," Pawin said softly, extending his arm. Rosalind turned to face him, and he draped the heavy cloak over her shoulders. It had such a weight that Rosalind had to fight twice as hard to maintain her posture under it. They began their walk down the corridor, each step feeling heavier than the last. Rosalind's grip on her brother's arm tightened as they approached the September's imposing doors. "Pawin, I don't think I can do this," Rosalind admitted, her voice trembling with anxiety. "You must," Pawin replied gently. "For father, for the house, and for yourself. I will always be with you." He paused before continuing, "She is always with you." His tone was comforting, yet firm. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a silver shield necklace with the emblem of House Rosby, the house of their mother. Carefully, he placed it around Rosalind's neck. "She loved you so much. She would have been so proud," Pawin said, his own eyes misting with tears. Rosalind took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the large wooden doors ahead. "Ready?" Pawin asked softly. "Ready," Rosalind responded. Chapter 3, Robb. Chapter text. Robb. An hour. Robb Stark exclaimed, his voice a mixture of shock and frustration. "The sooner it's done, the sooner we can reach King's Landing," Catelyn assured him, her tone calm and resolute. "What's her name?" Robb asked, his voice dropping to a whisper as he realized he should know this before marrying her. "Her name is Rosalind," Catelyn replied, her eyes softening. "She is a 16-year-old maid. She seems perfect. She sings, dances, sews, and possesses every quality one could wish for in a lady of the house. But what truly won me over was her courage. She stood up to her father for what she believed was right. And she looks?" Robb inquired quietly, his gaze averted, as if embarrassed by his curiosity. "Extremely beautiful," Catelyn answered with a gentle laugh. "Though I fear you might overshadow her, she is quite small. The northern firs will engulf her." She chuckled softly, and Robb managed a sigh of relief, despite his efforts to hide it. "I will look after her," Robb vowed, his expression earnest. "I know this marriage isn't how you envisioned it, nor how I did. But she will be my wife and my family, and I will protect her." "I know you will," Catelyn said softly, cupping his face in her hands. "Now, please, put on a clean shirt for your wedding." Robb offered her a small, reassuring smile before leaving the tent in a brisk stride. Underscore 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 underscore. As Rob stood facing the septon, the doors to the hall creaked open, announcing the arrival of his new bride. He wrestled with the impulse to turn and see her, aware that his first impression would forever shape his view of her. After a moment's hesitation, he glanced back briefly before redirecting his focus ahead. Roslyn appeared like a vision from a fairy tale. Her skin was as pale as the snow that blanketed Winterfell, and her dark mahogany hair made the contrast even larger. She was beautiful, something to be treasured, something to be protected. She moved with an ethereal grace, yet Rob noticed she leaned on the man beside her, probably to steady her nerves. The man was older, her brother, he presumed. Despite his own experience growing up among a large family, he couldn't imagine life in such a sprawling household, especially without a mother. Rob had been given a brief history of Roslyn's lineage and how she was close to all 5 of her full-blood brothers, especially Pawin, the oldest, who he believed was walking next to her. As Roslyn approached, Rob heard his mother exhale deeply. He observed that her hands were trembling and her gaze was fixed on the floor, clearly nervous. At this, Roslyn and Rob locked eyes for the first time. He saw the fear in her eyes and, in an effort to alleviate her anxiety, he forced a reassuring smile. The septon began. Who comes before both gods this night? Roslyn, of House Free, comes here to be wed. A woman grown, true-born, and noble. She seeks the blessing of the gods. Who comes to claim her? The brother said, struggling with the exact words, and Rob could tell he wasn't used to northern weddings. Rob, of House Stark, heir to Winterfell and the North. Who gives her? Rob responded, snapping his gaze back to the septon. Pawin, of House Free, her father's 15th son and this lady's brother, Pawin said clearly, before kissing his sister on the cheek and taking his place on the bride's side. You may now cloak the bride and bring her under your protection, the septon continued, not waiting for Pawin to sit fully. Roslyn turned her back to Rob, and he carefully removed the worn grey cloak from her shoulders. He then draped his own white cloak, embroidered with a grey direwolf, over her. The cloak was heavy, nearly enveloping her as he adjusted it, tying the strings to secure it. Thank you, my lord, Roslyn whispered, her voice barely audible. My lords, my ladies, the septon's voice rang out, we stand here in the sight of gods and men to witness the union of man and wife. One flesh, one heart, one soul, now and forever. Let it be known that Roslyn of House Free and Rob of House Stark are one heart, one flesh, one soul. Cursed be he who would seek to tear them asunder. The septon's pronouncement commanded Rob's attention again. He took Roslyn's delicate hands in his, and the septon bound their hands with a grey ribbon. In the sight of the 7, I hereby seal these 2 souls, binding them as one for eternity. Father. Smith. Warrior. Mother. Maiden. Crone. Stranger. I am hers and she is mine, from this day until the end of my days, Rob said solemnly. Roslyn echoed his vows in a soft whisper, Father. Smith. Warrior. Mother. Maiden. Crone. Stranger. I am his and he is mine, from this day until the end of my days. In a swift motion, before he could second-guess himself, Rob's lips met Roslyn's. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but in that brief moment, he felt the tension in her body dissolve. Although this marriage wasn't as he had hoped, she was now his wife, and he was resolved to protect her. Roslyn's father had left the decoration for the wedding in Roslyn's brother Oliver's hands. He had what Roslyn would call a sensitive side and what her father would call weakness. He had simply decorated the great hall with a combination of blue hydrangeas and grey roses for both houses and had pulled the tables into 2 long rows down from the central lord's table. Rob was of course seated next to his new wife on the head table, and she, in turn, had been seated next to her father, but he immediately felt sympathy for his mother who had been placed between the senior lord and his child bride. The northern lords were clustered together but surrounded by Freys, including Pawin and Oliver, in a bid to mix before the brothers joined them on the journey south. As the meal was served, the room was in silence with just a few people whispering amongst themselves, not wanting to be the first ones to increase the amount of noise. Someone bring the pissing wine, the good stuff. No better time to drink it than my favorite daughter's wedding day. His voice boomed across the room and Rob saw Roslyn flinch as he began to speak. Moments later, servants returned with jugs of wine, filling the guests' cups with fervor. Abergold Walder Free declared as his cup was replenished. My father saved gallons of this stuff for a special day. He only drank 1 cup, and that was the day he died. He guffawed, finishing his cup in 1 gulp and raising it for more. Caitlin took a small, polite sip from her own cup before turning her attention to Roslyn. The bride made a face at the wine, clearly uncomfortable with the thought of drinking it. The servant moved to fill Rob's cup, but Rob placed a hand on top, causing Walder Free's laughter to halt abruptly. Is my wine not good enough for the great Lord Stark? Free's tone dripped with venom. The room fell silent, eyes fixed on the head table, waiting for Rob's response. Rob slowly removed his hand from the cup and replied calmly, we have a long journey tomorrow, and I need to remain fully alert, especially with your daughter's safety now in my hands. 1 cup won't hurt, Free said dismissively. I'm not asking you to toast to me or my house, you can drink to my daughter instead. He stood abruptly, raising his cup toward the guests. To my beautiful daughter Roslyn, the new Lady Stark. May she return with a Stark son or not return at all, he said with a booming laugh. To Robb Stark, my new son. May House Stark remember who helped them in their time of need. The last remark, though cloaked in humor, carried an ominous undertone. Rob felt inclined to stand and say something, but Roslyn gave a tight squeeze to his hand before letting go in a way that made him realize that it would not be a good idea, and in an attempt to appease his new good father raised his cup slightly before taking a large swig. As hours passed, the great hall filled with the joyous laughter of Freys and, to Rob's surprise, the deep laughter of several northern lords mingled with the chuckles from the Riverlanders. The central tables were pushed aside, and the space transformed into a dance floor. 3 girls twirled with grace, while others stumbled. A girl named Alex, as his mother had introduced her, fell into the arms of Edmure Tully. They soon danced together in a clumsy but endearing manner. He can have her for free if he wants a bride, or 10 silver stags if he wants a whore, Rob overheard Lord Free say to his mother through a breathy laugh that visibly made her uncomfortable. Rob shot his mother a disapproving look, knowing that Edmure might be tempted by Free's offer. He did not want to give Walder Free any more leverage by allowing him to broker a marriage with House Tully. Caitlin slowly rose from her seat, her movement drawing the attention of the remaining guests. I am retiring for the night, thank you Lord Free for your hospitality, she announced, her voice soft but resolute. As she prepared to leave, she leaned in to press a tender kiss on Roslyn's cheek, then turned to gently cup Rob's face with her hands. As Caitlin departed, a ripple of movement followed through the hall. The young girls, who had been chattering and giggling earlier, now began to leave in quick succession. The remaining women trickled out in small groups over the next hour, until only Roslyn remained. She appeared weary, her eyes struggling to stay open, but she valiantly fought to remain upright. Rob rose abruptly. His movement halted the music and laughter, casting a sudden, heavy silence over the hall. All eyes turned to him, apart from Roslyn's gaze that remained fixed on the cold ham on her plate, now as unappetizing as the lifeless remains of Robert Baratheon. Rob extended a hand to Roslyn, which she took with a visible sigh of relief. She rose from her seat, her delicate frame looking up at him with a mixture of apprehension and resignation. Rob had spent his life looking up to towering figures like Lord John Umber, but now he found himself in the unfamiliar position of being down at his new bride. Please, continue, Rob urged to the rest of the hall, his voice firm but gentle, as he guided Roslyn down a quiet corridor. An awkward silence enveloped them, broken only by the distant echoes of laughter that resumed once they were out of sight. Roslyn led him to the guest chamber prepared for them, a small room nestled high in one of the castle's towers. She stepped aside, allowing Rob to open the door. Thank you, my lord, Roslyn murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She spoke so softly that Rob became so concentrated on her that he forgot to step into the room. He eventually broke out of his daydream, stepping through the doors, removing his cape the minute Roslyn closed the door. Please, just Rob. I spend every day dealing with people who I have known since boyhood calling me Lord. If anyone's going to call me by my name, it's going to be my wife, he said softly, his tone imbued with earnestness. Roslyn nodded but remained by the door, her face filling with a growing anxiety. Rob examined the small room that contained just a bed and vanity and saw a grey silk nightdress laid out on the bed, and little else. His gaze flickered to Roslyn as she stood motionless, the weight of the evening evident in her posture. He removed his jacket, boots, and the rest of his outer garments, leaving himself in just his trousers and shirt. "Roslyn," he said, approaching her and gently taking her hands in his, "you are my family now. I vow to keep you safe always." He walked behind her and carefully removed the Stark cloak she wore. As it fell away, her shoulders seemed to relax, a fleeting sense of relief passing over her features. Standing before her, he rolled up his sleeves and spoke with a voice tinged with regret. "I don't want this, you know. It's not you, you're beautiful, the most beautiful lady I've ever seen. It's just, I don't know you yet. In another time, under different circumstances, I would wait. But I am reliant on your father's support, and I fear he might use any reason against me." "I understand," Roslyn replied softly, her voice trembling. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared unease. Rob, seeking to ease the tension, gently stroked her arm and then her hand with his thumb. "Do you need help with your dress?" he asked, attempting to be as considerate as possible. Roslyn nodded, turning her back to him. The intricate knots of her dress were a challenge, but Rob's deft fingers worked patiently until they fell apart. With Roslyn's assistance, the dress slipped to the floor, revealing her delicate undergown. He walked up behind her and ran his hand down her shoulder, her body shivered as he did so. He turned her around to see her butt instead, he was greeted with her eyes looking straight down. Gently he put his hand on her chin and lifted it up so that their eyes met. "Lay down on the bed," he said in the gentlest voice he could muster. She obeyed. He climbed on top of her and was so close he could hear her breathing become more rapid. "Just try to breathe." Rob felt all of her muscles tense as he slipped out of his underwear and threw them onto the floor. She closed her eyes as he slowly got closer and closer to her. "I need to do this once and then we don't have to until you're comfortable," Rob murmured, but he wasn't sure if he was telling her or himself. Her grip tightened on the bed sheets as he pushed into her. Rob continued to move as slowly as possible, resisting the urge to pull out and comfort her. He hated this. He had wanted a bride who would want him in her bed, wanted her to desire him as he desires her. Suddenly his breathing became more erratic as he began to speed up before he eventually spilled inside her. He placed a hand to her face which caused her to open her eyes and stare into his. After a few moments he said, "I am so sorry, but I promise I will wake up every day and fight for you to forgive me." Rob moved to the bed, retrieving his undergarments from the floor and pulling them on before removing his shirt. He sat on the edge of the bed, facing away from Roslyn, allowing her the privacy she needed to change into her nightdress. The room was filled with an uncomfortable quiet as she quickly prepared herself for bed. She quietly slid beneath the sheets, and Rob followed, positioning himself on the far edge of the bed to avoid any accidental touch. Rob lay on his side, his thoughts a tangled mess of uncertainty and fear. He longed to speak, to bridge the gap between them, but found himself at a loss for words. Suddenly, Roslyn reached out and placed her hand on his face, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. The gentle gesture drew Rob's attention, and he instinctively pulled her closer, allowing her to rest her face against his bare chest. The steady rise and fall of her breathing was a small comfort as he listened to it. "Thank you for saving me," she said quietly. Chapter 4, Roslyn 2 and Rob 2. Chapter text. Roslyn 2 and Rob 2. Roslyn 2. The harsh morning sun, cutting through the thin curtains, rudely awakened Roslyn from her restless sleep. She reached out, feeling the cold, empty space beside her where Rob had been. Her heart sank slightly, knowing he likely had little desire to linger any longer than necessary. As she sat up, her eyes fell upon a figure at the end of the bed. Blinking against the brightness, she gradually made out Rob, struggling with the laces of his boots. A wave of awkwardness washed over her, and she fought the impulse to reach out and offer comfort. Rob's gaze met hers, and he seemed momentarily surprised to find her awake. "I need to speak with the Lords about our journey south," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "We have to leave today. I realize it's a lot to ask of you, to leave your home after only knowing me for a day, but time is of the essence." Roslyn slid out of bed and approached him, her heart swelling with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "This home was my prison," she began, her voice steady despite the turbulent emotions. "Though I cherish some people here, most of my family were more like prison guards. Leaving with you feels like a release from captivity. But may I offer some advice?" Rob looked up, his eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and sympathy. Of course. Speak with my father before you depart, Rosalind advised, her voice earnest. My house has many men at its disposal, but my father will only part with them if you make a strong impression. He finds men who don't challenge his terms rather dull. Rob's eyes softened with understanding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small grey velour pouch. From it, he retrieved a simple yet exquisite silver ring. It had no stone, no jewels, but was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. This ring, he said softly, is made from the metal that forged the gates of Winterfell. It belonged to my grandmother and has been passed down through the Stark lineage for generations. It was meant to go from my uncle to my mother before he died, but now I would like you to wear it. He placed the ring gently in her palm, closing her fingers around it before pressing a tender kiss to her hand. We'll be leaving soon, he added before stepping out to prepare his men. Rosalind remained in the room, contemplating the new life that awaited her, both on the road and at Winterfell. As the reality of her situation set in, she realized she needed to get dressed. She scanned the room, noting that her only available garments were her wedding dress and her nightgown. The thought of running through the halls of the twins in either was unappealing. Her concerns were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Rosalind, it's Lady Stark," came a gentle voice. Reluctantly, Rosalind approached the door and peered through the gap. Catelyn Stark stood there, holding a bundle of clothing. Encouraged by the sight, Rosalind opened the door but kept her body partially hidden behind it. As soon as Catelyn entered, Rosalind quickly closed the door to maintain her modesty. Catelyn laid out a dark blue dress on the bed. It appeared to be knee-length, which puzzled Rosalind until Catelyn produced a pair of black riding trousers and brown riding boots. "I thought you might need practical riding attire," Catelyn explained briskly. "As Rob's wife and the Lady of Winterfell, you will be expected to ride at the front alongside him. If you're uncomfortable, we can make an exception." Rosalind nodded, though she was still unsure about her new relationship with Catelyn. "Yes, I can ride," she confirmed. "Good," Catelyn said with a hint of satisfaction. "Get dressed, and I'll help with your hair. It will need to be up and out of the way for the journey. _______________________________________________________________________________________________________________ Meanwhile, Robb was deep in conversation with Stephen Frey, heir to the twins. Robb was struck by Stephen's intelligence and wit, finding it curious how such qualities emerged from the same lineage as Walder Frey. Just then, the great hall's doors burst open, revealing Walder Frey seated at the head of the breakfast table, engaged in animated conversation with Edmure Tully. As Robb approached, Walder's voice boomed across the room. "Here he is, my new son. How was my most beautiful daughter? A good lay. Her mother always was," he laughed, giving Edmure's shoulder a hearty slap. Edmure joined in awkwardly. "She is perfect, my lord," Robb replied as innocently as he could, trying to avoid the question. "As long as she gives me a grandson, I don't care how perfect she is," Walder declared, raising a goblet. "When the gods are willing," Robb nodded politely, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Walder's gaze sharpened. "And after all my hospitality, you still have more to ask of me. Out with it, and we'll see how far my generosity extends." Robb took a deep breath. "I've written to the king, requesting he delay any decisions regarding my father's fate until I reach King's Landing. The Dowager Queen, Cersei, has replied on his behalf and has agreed to this request. My plan is to negotiate for my father's freedom. I seek no war for northern independence or in Robert Baratheon's name. But if the king refuses or acts before I arrive, I'll need an army. The northern forces alone will not suffice. My wife tells me House Frey has men, and I ask for your assistance. Those who support us will be richly rewarded once my father is home, and especially given my wife's loyalty and affection for her family." Walder feigned vulnerability. "So you want me to send my men south, leaving my family exposed?" "Not all your men, my lord," Robb replied smoothly. "You may retain as many as you deem necessary for your safety. I only ask for what you can spare." "Well, you're in luck, Lord Stark. My uncle and I were just discussing House Tully's need for an heir and his desire to marry my granddaughter Alex. A marriage into House Tully for half of my army, House Stark, is free from payment. A bargain, I'd say." Robb knew that successive marriages into House Stark and House Tully would increase Walder Frey's influence more than he desired. However, seeing Edmure's interest in Alex, Rob recognized that such a betrothal might be a lesser evil compared to other potential costs. Before agreeing, he recalled Rosalind's advice about fighting for terms. "You can have the marriage," Rob said cautiously. "But you know as well as I do that marrying the Lord of Riverrun does more than put your blood in line for the seat, it gives you power. More power than your family has had since the time of the dragons. Power worth 3/4 of your men." Walder's expression shifted from amusement to a dark frown before he forced a smile. "You're braver than I thought, Lord Stark. Perhaps my daughter won't perish in your war. Fine, you can have as many of my men as you desire, and may that and the gods help you to bring that idiot back to marry Alex once you return north. The women desire a grand wedding after the rush of the last one. I do like to see my girls happy, so ensure your uncle returns alive." Walder rose from the table. "Do you leave now?" "Within the hour," Rob confirmed. "Stephen will prepare the men. I won't see you off, I have business with my wife. Give Rosalind my regards and fill her belly with the sun as quickly as possible." Walder chuckled as he left the room. _________. Rosalind too. Rosalind, now fully dressed, bid farewell to Caitlin, who was preparing her horse for the journey. Rosalind decided to take one last walk through the halls of the twins, as she had no plans to return. She lingered in the corridors, saying silent goodbyes to the place she had called home, her heart heavy with the thought of leaving behind loved ones and familiar faces. She arrived at her old room to find Tita handing her bag to a free soldier. Rosalind's heart ached as she realized how her departure affected her siblings, especially Tita, who had no one to shield her and faced an uncertain future. Unnoticed, Rosalind watched as Tita scribbled a farewell note. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "Tita." Tita looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Rosalind, I thought it best to leave a note for the girls. If we said goodbye in person, they'd never let us go, or I wouldn't want to leave." "They'll be all right," Rosalind said soothingly. "Just like we were." She offered her hand, and the two sisters walked out together, casting one last, wistful glance at the room they had shared for so many years before Rosalind gently closed the door behind them. In silence, they made their way to the Stark camp, which was now a hive of activity. Tents had been dismantled, and the army stood in neat formation with horses behind them. Rosalind noticed Pawin helping Oliver onto his horse at the far side of the courtyard. The sight of the now doubled army suggested that Rob had successfully convinced her father to contribute additional men. Rosalind's gaze fell upon Rob, who was engaged in a moment with his mother. Caitlin Stark was adjusting his hair with practiced care, their conversation animated and filled with a warmth that Rosalind had not yet fully experienced with them. As Rosalind and Tita approached, the two women split, and Rosalind gave Tita's hands a reassuring squeeze before releasing them. She watched as Tita followed Caitlin towards the horses, her sister's expression a mix of nervousness and resignation. Standing alone, Rosalind clasped her hands tightly together, her fingers intertwined in a silent plea for courage. She waited anxiously for Rob to turn and acknowledge her, uncertain about which horse she was to ride. The minutes felt like hours as she wrestled with her apprehension. At last, Rob turned, his face breaking into a broad, genuine grin. "Lady Stark," he greeted her, his tone light and filled with cheer. "Lord Stark," Rosalind replied, doing her best to mirror his joy despite her fluttering nerves. Rob reached out, gently prying her hands apart before lacing his fingers with hers. With a tender gesture, he guided her to the frontmost horses. Their fingers remained intertwined, offering a silent comfort as they approached their mounts. Rob helped Rosalind onto her horse with practiced ease, his touch firm yet gentle. Before she could fully settle, he pressed a soft kiss to her hand, his eyes momentarily fixed on the ring she now wore. Rosalind noticed the gleam of pride in his eyes, but she couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. There was no one else around to witness this exchange, no performance was required, just the two of them. Despite the absence of an audience, Rob's joy was palpable. As they prepared to depart, Rosalind noticed that one horse still stood empty, its reins hanging loosely. Rob's brow furrowed in concern as he scanned the gathering. "Where is my uncle?" he asked Lord Karstark. Lord Karstark gestured towards the entrance of the twins, where Lord Tully was standing with a girl Rosalind immediately recognized as Alex. Lord Tully was handing something to her and pressing a tender kiss to her cheek before hurrying towards the assembled army. Rosalind watched with a pang of surprise as the group moved forward, leaving the twins, and Alex, behind. She had expected more of her kin to see them off, but she quickly pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on Rob. His cheerful demeanor had shifted to a serious, contemplative expression as he prepared for the journey ahead. The weight of their impending departure settled over her, and Rosalind began to contemplate the road that lay before them, both physically and emotionally. Chapter 5, Sangza I. Chapter Text. Sangza I. Sangza sat in her dimly lit chambers, the weight of her brother Rob's recent marriage to Rosalind Free heavy on her heart. The news of her family's decisions in the north had left her feeling isolated and troubled, but she knew better than to succumb to despair. In King's Landing, where every word and gesture could be a weapon, she had begun to learn the importance of caution and strategy. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, there was a soft knock on the door. Straightening her posture with a practiced composure, Sangza called out, "Come in." The door swung open, and Cersei Lannister glided into the room, her presence a commanding force. The Queen Regent's regal attire and poised demeanor instantly filled the space with an air of authority. Sangza rose from her seat, her eyes locking with Cersei's as she sought any clue to the Queen's intentions. Sangza Cersei greeted, her smile edged with a condescending glimmer. "I trust you've heard about your brother's hasty choice of bride." "Yes, Your Grace," Sangza replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I received the news earlier today." Cersei's gaze lingered on Sangza, her eyes calculating as though weighing Sangza's every reaction. "It seems your future in the north has become rather uncertain. However, I have a proposal that will secure your position and ensure your interests are safeguarded." Sangza's curiosity was piqued, but she masked her anticipation with a cautious demeanor. "What solution do you suggest, Your Grace?" A sly smile crept across Cersei's lips. "Your betrothal to my son, Joffrey, remains intact. Despite your brother's reckless decisions, this union will ensure your safety and maintain the alliance between House Stark and House Lannister." At the mention of Joffrey, Sangza's heart skipped a beat. Once, the prospect of marrying the future king had filled her with dreams of grandeur. Now, those dreams were tainted by the cruelty she had witnessed. "Your Grace," Sangza began hesitantly, "I understand the importance of our alliance, but considering the circumstances, shouldn't we?" Cersei's expression hardened, her voice turning icy. "Do not mistake your position, little bird. The betrothal has been agreed upon by both our houses, endorsed by your father. It will not be broken. Your duty is to marry Joffrey and fulfill your role as queen." Sangza's shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of her resignation. She knew she had little choice but to comply with Cersei's plans for now. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying a note of resigned acceptance. "I will fulfill my duties and marry King Joffrey." Cersei's eyes softened, a flicker of satisfaction glimmering within. "Good. I'm pleased to see you understand the gravity of your situation. I will ensure that the necessary arrangements for your wedding are made promptly." Sangza nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of the road ahead. Navigating the treacherous landscape of King's Landing would demand all her strength and cunning. She steeled herself for the challenges to come, determined to endure for the sake of her family. Once Cersei had departed, leaving the room with an air of finality, Sangza was left alone with her thoughts. She stared out of the window at the city beyond, the shadows of the Red Keep stretching across the horizon. Sangza sat at her desk in her chamber, a sense of urgency driving her to pick up her quill and parchment. Her heart felt heavy with the weight of the decisions being made on her behalf, decisions that seemed to shape her future without her consent. She took a deep breath and began to write, her words flowing from her heart onto the parchment. "My beloved Rob. With every word I pen in this letter, my heart aches and yearns for your presence, for your protection. I beseech you, my dear brother, to hear my plea and save me from the impending doom that awaits me. I find myself trapped in the clutches of King's Landing, where the Lannisters hold sway and my fate hangs by a thread. The news of my betrothal to Joffrey, the cruel and unpredictable boy who sits upon the Iron Throne, weighs heavily upon me. The thought of a life bound to him fills me with profound dread. I beg you to seek an alliance with the Tyrells. I know House Tyrell to be honorable and just, a far cry from the treachery and cruelty of the Lannisters. Willers Tyrell is known for his kindness and wisdom, and I believe that a union between our houses would not only strengthen the North but also shield me from the horrors that await me here. The Tyrells have shown their loyalty to the crown, and by aligning with them, we could forge an alliance against the tyranny that surrounds us. Though I am but a girl, and know little of the intricacies of lordly thoughts, I know that as long as I remain in King's Landing, I will be under Joffrey and his mother's control. Robb, you are my beacon in this storm. I plead with you to rally our forces and march upon King's Landing with the Tyrells to rescue me from this betrothal. I understand the gravity of this request and the sacrifices it entails, but I beg you to consider the alternative, a life of torment beside Joffrey. The thought of the cruelty that awaits me chills my very soul. Save me, dear brother, for I am drowning in despair. With unwavering love and faith in your strength. Sansa. Sansa's hands trembled as she folded the letter with meticulous care, sealing it with a heavy heart. The danger of her predicament loomed large, and she knew she had to act swiftly to ensure her message made it out of King's Landing. As she prepared to leave her chambers, her steps were light yet urgent. The shadows of the Red Keep seemed to close in around her as she navigated the passages, her heart racing with each echoing footfall. She could not afford another confrontation, especially with Cersea's spies ever vigilant. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps froze her in place. Instinctively, she pressed against the wall, blending into the darkness. Her pulse quickened as Cersei appeared, flanked by her guards, her piercing gaze scanning the corridor with predatory precision. Lady Sansa. Cersei's voice oozed with disdain, what brings you to this shadowed corner of the castle? Sansa's heart sank, realizing her carefully guarded secret was at risk. Summoning her courage, she met Cersei's gaze with a semblance of calm. I sought a moment of solitude, Your Grace, she replied, her tone measured. Cersei's lips curled into a knowing smirk. In these perilous times, one must be cautious even in solitude. Secrets, after all, have a way of coming to light. Desperation flickered in Sansa's mind as she sought to divert Cersei's attention. I beg your pardon, Your Grace, I was on my way to the September for a moment of prayer, she said, feigning confusion. Cersei's eyes narrowed, suspicion evident. And yet, you clutch something tightly in your hands, Lady Sansa. Sansa's heart raced, but she swiftly concealed the letter within the folds of her gown. It is but a trinket, Your Grace, she said, striving to sound nonchalant. Cersei's curiosity was piqued. A trinket? Show me. With trembling hands, Sansa pulled out a delicate necklace adorned with a sparkling gem, holding it up for Cersei to examine. An exquisite piece, Lady Sansa, Cersei said, her tone tinged with disappointment. But do take care, little bird, we wouldn't want you to lose such a beautiful jewel. Sansa nodded, her heart pounding with the narrow escape. Thank you for your advice, Your Grace. I will heed your words. Cersei's gaze lingered a moment longer before she turned on her heel, her guards following her departure. As they disappeared down the corridor, Sansa exhaled a shaky breath, her relief mingled with renewed anxiety. The danger was far from over, and Sansa knew she needed to find a safer way to get her letter to Robb. Determined, she set her mind to devising a plan, knowing that her future was at stake. Back in her chambers, Sansa's thoughts turned to Myrtle, one of her maids. Unassuming and reliable, Myrtle was the perfect candidate for this dangerous task, and Sansa truly felt like she could trust her. Sansa approached her with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Myrtle, Sansa said softly, beckoning the maid closer. I need your help with something of utmost importance. I trust you will carry this out discreetly. Myrtle's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. Of course, my lady. What can I do for you? Sansa took a deep breath, her hands trembling. I have a letter for my brother Robb. I need you to deliver it, but it must remain hidden from prying eyes. Myrtle's expression shifted from shock to worry. But, my lady, if I am caught? Sansa's hand found Myrtle's shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. I understand the dangers, Myrtle, she said softly. But you are the only one I trust. Your discretion and loyalty are my only hope. Please, help me. Seeing the earnest plea in Sansa's eyes, Myrtle's resolve hardened. I will do it, my lady. I will find a way to get your letter safely to Lord Robb. Relief washed over Sangza with Myrtle's commitment. She felt a glimmer of hope amidst her fears. They quickly devised a plan. Myrtle would conceal the letter within the lining of her gown, meticulously stitched inside to avoid suspicion, and would pay someone in the city to take it to the Stark army. As the day wore on, Sangza watched Myrtle with a mixture of anxiety and hope. The maid moved about her duties with a newfound resolve, her eyes darting nervously around the bustling corridors. Sangza knew the success of their plan depended entirely on Myrtle's ability to evade detection. When evening arrived, Sangza bid her maid a silent, anxious farewell. As Myrtle approached Circea's chambers, her hands trembled with a mix of anticipation and fear. She knocked softly, and after a moment's pause, the door swung open. Circea's gaze was sharp and calculating. "What brings you here?" she asked with a cunning smile. Myrtle's voice quivered as she presented the letter to Circea, her palms slick with sweat. "I have something you might find of interest, my queen," she said, eyes averted. Circea's eyes glittered with a predatory mix of curiosity and triumph as she took the letter. She broke the seal and began to read Sangza's heartfelt plea. Her expression shifted from intrigue to a satisfied smirk. "So, the little bird is calling for her brother's aid," Circea mused with malicious delight. "How very convenient." Now Circea's voice turned cold and commanding. "You will continue to serve as my eyes and ears within Sangza's chambers. The moment you hear anything more, you will report to me." Myrtle nodded, unable to meet Circea's piercing gaze. Circea's mind was already at work. Sangza needed to be removed from Joffrey's gaze and from King's Landing altogether. She had given the girl a chance, but she had shown herself to have too much resolve, too much agency. To ensure she was no longer a threat, the girl needed to be broken. Chapter 6, Rob 3. Chapter text. Rob 3. The journey to King's Landing had stretched into weeks, each day a relentless march that seemed to blur together in a haze of anxiety and fear. Robb Stark's heart was heavy with the worry that they might arrive too late to save his father and his sisters. The uncertainty of Joffrey gnawed at him. His unpredictability and recklessness were well known to Robb and could be seen from the time the boy had spent at Winterfell when King Robert was still alive, and although Cersei had promised that no decision would be made until the Stark host arrived, Robb had doubts about her ability to control her son. In the midst of this, Roslyn offered a beacon of solace. Her presence was a balm to his frayed nerves, her unwavering care a rare gift amidst the chaos. She had seamlessly integrated into their world, engaging with the Northern Lords with a genuine interest in their lands and families. Her attentiveness was a quiet strength that Robb came to rely on. Every evening, after they made camp, Roslyn would find him and insist that he teach her how to ride, having little to no experience from her time growing up at the Twins. They would spend hours together, and she would try anything he asked of her, falling and getting back up over and over until her legs were so cut up and bruised that Robb would carry her back to their tent, but she never shed a tear. She would instead laugh at how clumsy she was. She wanted to learn of the North, of their ways and how to be a good lady to its people. Robb recounted tales from his childhood, stories of the North's vast expanse and its storied past. As Roslyn drifted into sleep each night, she would listen to him recounting his dreams and the things he wished to show her when they returned to Winterfell. They hadn't been intimate since their wedding night. Robb hoped that she would come to love him not out of obligation, but from a genuine desire. The sun had begun to set when they lay together in their tent, the dim light casting soft shadows around them. They were dressed for bed and settled into a position that had become their own small sanctuary. Roslyn's head rested on Robb's chest, her warmth a comforting presence as they exchanged stories, with Grey Wind laid at the foot of their bed. Old Nan, Robb began, his voice carrying the weight of nostalgia, is said to be the oldest living person in Winterfell. Bran always claimed she was so ancient she was just a girl when King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne visited the north. I haven't had the heart to tell him it can't possibly be true. He chuckled softly, the sound reverberating through his chest. Roslyn's laughter was a gentle, melodic sound. She must be incredibly wise. Robb's expression grew thoughtful. She was once, I think. But now, her stories are more fanciful than factual. When I was a boy, she spun tales of creatures that once roamed Westeros, of people who lived in trees, who built the wall to guard us against giant ice spiders and the undead. When I was a boy I found it so interesting, but now I'm a man I feel bad for her. It's as if she doesn't know that they are just stories anymore. I can't wait to see how crazy the stories have become when she tells our children, he laughed. At these words, Rosalind's mood shifted suddenly. She sat up abruptly, her eyes clouded with a vulnerability that Rob had seldom seen. Rob, what if I can't give you children? A pang of concern shot through him. Why would you think that? Rosalind's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. My mother died months after giving birth to me. My father was so consumed with shame that he forbade us to speak her name. Pawin told me he would only refer to my mother as her 4 months afterwards. I never once heard him speak her name. His anger and disappointment in not just her but all of us, it hung over me for my entire childhood. I don't want our children to feel that. Rob's heart ached at her words. He took her face gently in his hands, his gaze steady and filled with love. Our children will never feel that, Rosalind. Your father is a monster of his own making, his failings are not a reflection of who you are. Our children will be surrounded by our love. And if the gods should ever take one of us from them, the other will ensure that our love for them remains unwavering, constant and known. With a tenderness that spoke of deep commitment, Rob leaned in and pressed a soft, reassuring kiss to her lips. The world outside their tent seemed to fade away. As Rob pulled back, his gaze softened, searching for the right words to offer an apology. Rosalind stood before him, young and fragile, newly thrust into a world that was entirely foreign to her. She had been taken from her family, her home, and everything she had ever known. Now, in this unfamiliar life, the only constant she had was him, and here he was, on the verge of shattering that fragile trust. Rob started, his voice hesitant, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could continue, Rosalind moved swiftly. With a surge of emotion, she grabbed his shirt and pulled him into a fierce, passionate kiss. The intensity of her desire took Rob by surprise. At that moment, she wanted him more than anything she had ever wanted before. For a heartbeat, Rob was stunned, his mind reeling, but soon he found himself surrendering to the moment. He returned the kiss with equal intensity, drawing her closer until she was in his lap. Their lips remained locked as Rosalind's fingers tangled in his auburn hair, gently tugging at the strands. She straddled him, her legs either side of him, her body pressing against his in a way that left no doubt of the fire burning between them. As the passion continued to build, Rob was actively fighting the urge to push them further. Rosalind's core was positioned over his cock and he wanted nothing more than to grab her waist and feel her against him harder, but he resisted. She was his wife, not some random whore, and they wouldn't go any further than she wanted to go. Rob settled to place his hands on her hips, squeezing slightly to relieve some of his building tension. With this, Rosalind began to react. Her nightdress was bunched up just below her waist and she could feel the hardening mound beneath her. Then, before she even knew what she was doing, she began to grind against it. A feeling of pleasure overcame her as Rob moaned deeply against her mouth, deepening the kiss and gripping her waist even tighter. After a breathless moment, Rob reluctantly pulled back, his breathing uneven. His blue eyes searched hers, his voice low but laced with concern. Are you sure this is what you want? We can wait until... Before he could finish, Rosalind silenced him, closing the gap between them once again. She claimed his lips in a tender yet urgent kiss, as if trying to communicate all the words she didn't need to say. When she finally pulled away, her breath was warm against his skin as she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. I don't want to wait. I want this now. That was all the encouragement Rob needed. In one swift motion, he flipped his wife onto her back, his larger frame effortless overpowering her delicate form. She seemed so small, so fragile beneath him, her body almost lost in the shadow he cast over her. For a moment, he simply sat back, his gaze fixed on her. Rosalind's nervousness was palpable as she awaited his next move, but to Rob, she was breathtakingly beautiful. He could have watched her for hours, entranced by the way she looked up at him. At that moment, only one thought consumed him: she was his. Rob, Rosalind started, her voice trembling. But before she could finish, Rob leaned in closer, his voice a low, sensual murmur. Tell me what you want. Her breath hitched as she met his gaze, the intensity of his words making her heart race. I want you, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with longing and uncertainty. And what do you want me to do? He said, continuing to tease her, slowly running his hand up her thigh. I want you, inside of me, she managed to say in a whisper, ashamed to even say it. At this, a smirk grew across Rob's face and he removed his shirt in one fell swoop. Take off your nightdress. Roslyn hesitated. I want to see my wife as she is, Rob said, cupping her face with his hand. Beautiful, seductive and all mine. With Rob's words echoing in her mind, Roslyn felt a surge of newfound confidence wash over her. The hesitation that had lingered moments before was now replaced with a sense of empowerment, a deep-seated need to bridge the gap between them. She sat up from her position and stood at the side of their bed, her fingers moved slowly, trembling slightly as she reached for the delicate fabric of her dress. The material felt soft beneath her touch as she began to ease it from her shoulders. Each movement was deliberate, as the dress slipped down, exposing her pale skin beneath. The cool air kissed her skin, sending a shiver through her, but it was nothing compared to the warmth of Rob's gaze as he watched her. His eyes followed her every motion, dark with desire, his breath coming a little quicker as the dress pooled at her feet. Roslyn stood before him, feeling both vulnerable and powerful, the weight of the moment settling between them. There was a moment of stillness as she waited, wondering if he was still interested in her, in this. But the way Rob looked at her, with a mix of awe and hunger, dispelled any lingering doubt. She had never felt more desired, more cherished. Rob stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His hands, strong yet gentle, reached out to caress her now exposed skin, his touch sending sparks of electricity wherever he made contact. The intensity in his eyes deepened as he traced the curve of her waist. He seemed to be memorizing every inch of her, as if this moment was something sacred. You're so perfect, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, and in that instant, Roslyn knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze with a boldness she hadn't known she possessed, silently inviting him to close the gap between them even more. Without another word, Rob leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow, deliberate, and filled with unspoken promises. His hands moved to cradle her face, fingers threading through her hair as he deepened the kiss. Roslyn felt her knees weaken, her entire body melting into his as the last remnants of her nervousness evaporated. She was lost in him. As Rob's hands began to explore, sliding down the length of her body with a reverence that made her heart race, Roslyn knew that this was different. He had taken her before on their wedding night, but it had been cold and detached. This was fiery and wanting. He moved them back to the bed and laid her down beneath him. She could see through his trousers how much he wanted her. Her anticipation had built to such a point she didn't think she could take it anymore. As Rob began to move his kisses down her body, Roslyn couldn't describe the fear she felt mixed with an overwhelming need for it to continue. As he reached her sex, he stopped. He took his thumb and gently brushed it over her clit. Roslyn buckled under the feeling and felt herself getting slicker. She grabbed Rob's pillow from next to her on the bed and covered her face, not wanting Rob to see her like this. I want to see your face as you take me inside you, Rob said as he removed the pillow before returning his attention to her sex. He pushed a finger inside her, feeling how tight she was but also how much she needed him. He moved as slowly as possible, pulling his finger out before once again inserting it into her, this time thumbing her clit as he did so. Roslyn shuddered with every move, which encouraged Rob to move slower, teasing her with every tiny move. Eventually, he felt her pushing back against him as she craved more, harder, faster, deeper, and he was more than happy to oblige. He drove harder into her, slowly increasing his pace, using his other hand to grip her waist. She moaned under him deeper and longer as he felt her come apart underneath him. He didn't stop until she had completely come down from her climax, before removing himself and laying down next to her. He rested his hand on her bare stomach as she attempted to calm her breathing. Rob, that was. Roslyn began, her voice soft and breathless, still recovering. She searched for the right words, her mind swirling with emotions she had never fully understood until now. Well, I don't know, she continued, a faint blush rising in her cheeks. I didn't know. Haven't you ever touched yourself? Rob laughed. I most certainly have not, Roslyn said sharply, shocked at his suggestion. Rob continued laughing. Roslyn, it's not a bad thing. When you are alone, you can touch yourself between your legs. He inched closer to her, whispering in her ear as he ran his hand down her leg, and you can think about me and the way it felt when I was inside you. She once again felt her desire building as she almost shuddered from the feeling of Rob's gentle fingertips on her bare skin. Then as suddenly as it began, Rob pulled away. He stood up from the bed and removed his trousers, his cock sprung up and Rob laid himself back down on the bed. "I want you to ride me," he said as he ran his hands down her hips. "But I don't know how," she said, shy and ashamed. "I'll teach you," he whispered against her lips as he pulled her in for another kiss. Reluctantly and with all of her confidence from earlier disappearing, she climbed on top of him. He grabbed his cock and positioned it against her entrance, and after a few brief moments to compose herself, she sunk down onto him. Rob moaned as he filled her, his head snapped straight back and he closed his eyes as he savored the moment. Rosalind trembled as she felt him inside her. She had never felt so exposed as she was in this moment, with Rob staring up at her, every inch of her body on display for him. Rob returned to the moment and took her waist tightly in his hand and began to use his grip to grind her body against his. "Just like this," he said through moans, slowly but forcefully. Rosalind tried to do it herself, just like he had asked, rocking herself back and forth against him. She had been so worried about doing it wrong, but she felt a surge of confidence when she saw Rob reacting. His grip on her waist tightened as he started to lift her off of him before plunging back into her. At this Rosalind began to moan. It felt incredible, so incredible that she had lost track of what she had been doing. "Don't stop, Ro, you feel so good," Rob groaned. This brought her back and she continued to grind against him as he pushed himself deeper and deeper into her. They were both panting, each going harder and harder as they chased their peak. "You are mine, Rosalind," Rob grunted, his voice low and powerful, resonating with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His gaze bore into hers, dark and possessive, as he drove into her until there was no space left between them. "You are mine," he repeated, the words almost a growl, filled with a raw, undeniable need. "I want you to say it." Rosalind's breath caught in her throat, the sheer force of his command making her heart race. She could feel the weight of his desire, the certainty in his voice that left no room for doubt. Her hands clung to him, her voice trembling as she met his gaze, her eyes wide and filled with emotion. "I'm yours," she replied, her voice breathless but steady, each word carrying the full weight of her promise. "Forever." As she said it, Rob spilled inside her, reaching his climax, and she followed quickly afterwards. He gently rolled her off of him, and they lay side by side, their chests rising and falling as they tried to catch their breath. The room was quiet, the only sound was their soft, uneven breathing. Rosalind shifted closer, resting her head on Rob's chest, and he wrapped a protective arm around her, pulling her even closer. With his free hand, he reached for a nearby blanket and draped it over them. In the peaceful silence, Rob's fingers lazily combed through her hair, while Rosalind traced delicate circles on his chest. They didn't need words, the simple act of being together was enough. "That was incredible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell of the moment. Her eyes, wide with wonder, searched his face. "Is it always supposed to be like that?" A soft chuckle escaped his lips, filled with a mix of disbelief and affection. "No," he murmured, his voice laced with a quiet sincerity. "It's never like that." He drew her closer, his hand gently cradling the back of her neck, and pressed a tender kiss to her lips. It was slower this time, more deliberate, as if he wanted to savor every second, every touch. The intimacy of the moment was abruptly shattered by a sharp, authoritative shout from outside the tent. "My lord!" Rob's expression darkened with irritation, and he rolled his eyes in a way that made Rosalind stifle a giggle. "Just a moment," he barked, his voice tinged with frustration. With a resigned sigh, he disentangled himself from the warmth of their bed and swung his legs over the side. He quickly pulled on his trousers, foregoing a shirt, and instead reached for a soft, velvet dressing gown. He slipped it over Rosalind's shoulders as she looked up at him with a grateful smile. As he adjusted the robe around her, he leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Satisfied that she was settled and comfortable, Rob called out firmly, "Enter." The tent flaps parted, and Lord Karstark strode in with a brisk, powerful stride. He gave a sharp nod of acknowledgement to both of them, his demeanor serious. "My lord, my lady," he began, his voice clipped and professional. "A raven arrived from King's Landing. There's a problem." Chapter 7, Rosalind 3. Chapter text. Rosalind 3. Rosalind followed closely behind Rob, her steps hurried to match his as they made their way to the tent where his war council was convened. The chill of the night air bit at her skin, and she clutched her dressing gown tightly around her, the thin fabric of her night dress offering little protection against the cold. "You can stay," Robb had reassured her as they left the warmth of their own tent. "I am your wife," Rosalind replied softly, slipping her hand into his, her fingers trembling slightly from the cold. "My place is by your side." Lord Karstark strode ahead of them with determination, his long strides forcing the young couple to quicken their pace to keep up. His tension was palpable, and it seemed to ripple through the air as they neared the council tent. When they finally entered, they found a group of northern lords already gathered, all of them looking disheveled and bleary-eyed, clearly roused from sleep to attend this meeting. Rosalind quickly realized she was the only woman present, a fact that did not go unnoticed by the assembled lords. She could feel their curious glances, some subtle, others more direct, as they took in her presence among them. As Robb and Rosalind took their places at the head of the council table, a murmur of "my lord" and other greetings rippled through the tent. Rosalind instinctively stepped back, allowing Robb to command the attention of his assembled lords. "My lords," Robb began, his voice cutting through the quiet, "I apologize for rousing you from your sleep after a hard day's ride, but word has come from King's Landing." A wave of whispers swept through the room as the lords exchanged anxious glances, their low voices blending into a chorus of concern. "King Joffrey has asked that I continue to King's Landing alone," Robb announced, his tone steady but tinged with the weight of the news. The murmurs erupted into a cacophony of shouts, the lord's outrage spilling over into the small space. "You can't, my lord," one cried. "They'll kill your father, and you too," another warned. "We'll crush the Lannister scum," bellowed a third, their voices rising in a fierce, rumbling uproar. "My lords, I understand everyone feels very strongly about this campaign, but let's not rush into a decision without all of the information," Robb commanded, his voice rising as he slammed his fists on the table, demanding the full attention of the room. The lords fell silent, their eyes fixed on him as he continued. "The king has written to me himself," he announced, holding a letter aloft for all to see. "His uncles, the Lords Stannis and Renly, have both declared themselves as king in their own right, and King Joffrey fears that the arrival of a large host such as ours in King's Landing would incite conflict." "It should." Lord Karstark interrupted, his voice filled with defiance. "Let us join with Stannis or Renly. Once they've slain that bastard boy king and claimed the throne, they can free your father and sisters." Robb snapped his head toward Karstark, his eyes narrowing as he addressed him directly. "And tell me, Lord Karstark, do you think my father and sisters would live to see that victory? If I declare for either of Joffrey's uncles, do you think my father would see another sunrise? Or that my sisters would see another moment of freedom?" Karstark's response was swift and unyielding. "I would rather your father be dead than swear to that cunt, and I'm sure he would want the same." "Lord Karstark," Robb thundered, his voice filling the tent with a fierce authority, "I remind you of your position on this council. As long as my father remains imprisoned, I speak for this council, for House Stark, and for the entirety of the North. Unless," he added, his tone dripping with mockery as he stepped aside, gesturing toward his place at the head of the table, "you would take my place. You'd better be careful, boy. You're not my lord yet. That's still your father, and it's him and your mother I fight for, not you and your pretty little wife," Karstark retorted, his voice steady and defiant as he shot a poisonous look at Rosalind. Robb's eyes narrowed as he began to slowly move away from the table, moving toward Karstark with deliberate steps. Grey Wind, his direwolf, followed close behind, his teeth bared in a low, menacing snarl. "And what do you think happens to you when I become Lord of Winterfell, Karstark?" Robb asked, his tone laced with sarcasm as he closed the distance between them. "Do I welcome you at my table? Offer you my bread and wine? With all your wisdom, surely you must have an answer for how I deal with insubordinate lords. Please, my lord, teach me, for I am only a boy," he added, the word boy almost spat from his lips as he leaned in. Karstark remained silent, his eyes scanning the room in a desperate search for support. But the other lords remained still, their faces impassive, offering no aid. His silence stretched on, and with a sharp turn, he exited the tent without another word. Theon, ever watchful, began to move, his hand already resting on the hilt of his sword as he prepared to follow. But Robb's voice, now calm and composed, halted him. "Leave him, Theon. He may be stubborn, but he's not stupid, Rob said, returning to his place beside Roslyn. As I was saying, Rob continued, his voice firm and measured, Joffrey is still open to negotiation regarding my father and the girls, but he has commanded that the northern forces remain at Harrenhal and advance no further south. From there, Lady Roslyn, myself, and a small garrison of no more than 30 men will proceed to King's Landing. Lord Bolton, his expression unreadable, spoke up with a question. My lord, Gregor Clegane has already made camp in Harrenhal. Yes, and you're to join him, Rob replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Harrenhal is a 2-day march away. Our forces will stay there before we continue the journey. Lord Bolton, I am entrusting my command to you in my absence. You will also serve as my mother's guardian. She won't understand why, but I cannot bring her with me. She would be too volatile in the presence of Cersei and Joffrey when we need to do everything we can to appease them. Lord Bolton nodded his acceptance, his eyes briefly meeting Rob's in a silent exchange of understanding. Rob then took Roslyn's hand, gently pulling her forward to stand beside him at the head of the table. He looked around at the assembled lords, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. I understand this is a risk, Rob continued, his voice steady yet tinged with the gravity of their situation, but what choice do we have? If we go to war against Joffrey, we will almost certainly lose my father. And we would be starting a war that we cannot win. How does it end? With all of us dead? Or do we put me on the Iron Throne? Rob almost chuckled at the idea. I ask you, my lords, is that what you want? Is that even possible? Or do we appease the Lannisters and go home? We can leave the Southerners to their politics and their games. You may want war and vengeance, but think of your people, your families back in the north, starving and cold because their father, their husband, their brother decided a pointless war was worth more than living. As Rob finished speaking, a heavy silence fell over the room. The lords, usually so vocal, were struck speechless by the harsh reality of his words. Roslyn, standing at his side, looked up at him with awe in her eyes. She squeezed his hand tightly, hoping to convey the pride she felt swelling in her chest. We're with you, my lord, Lord Umber declared, his voice resonating with unwavering loyalty as he unsheathed his sword and dropped to one knee. For your father, echoed Lord Bolton, following Umber's lead as he knelt, his face set with grim determination. Theon Greyjoy, standing nearby, looked at Rob with a serious expression before asking, am I your brother? Always, Rob replied, placing a firm hand on Theon's shoulder, his gaze steady. A small smile tugged at Theon's lips. Then there's nowhere I'd rather be, he said with a chuckle, before dropping to his knee beside the others. One by one, the remaining lords followed suit, their swords glinting in the dim light as they knelt in allegiance. Rob turned to Roslyn, his expression softening as he addressed her. I know I didn't ask you before, possibly putting you in danger. If you wish, you can stay with my mother at Harrenhal. Roslyn glanced down at the ring on her finger, her thumb gently tracing its edges. Then, lifting her eyes to meet Rob's, she spoke softly but with unwavering resolve. I go where you go. I will follow wherever you lead. Rob's eyes softened with affection as he pressed a quick kiss to her ring. As he did, Roslyn tenderly cupped the back of his head, leaning in to whisper in a voice meant only for him, my wolf. Please rise, my lords, Rob said, his voice carrying authority as he turned back to the assembled men. The lords rose, their swords still in hand, as they looked to him for further instruction. Rob's gaze shifted to Theon Greyjoy, a warmth in his eyes. Theon, you may not be my brother by blood, but you are my brother in every way that matters. I'm asking you to represent my house and visit your father. Gather as many men as you can and take them to the north, it has been unprotected for far too long. Of course, my lord, Theon replied, his voice steady with determination. He stepped forward, clasping hands with Rob in a firm, brotherly embrace. The bond between them was clear. Go now and prepare to depart at early light, Rob instructed, stepping back from Theon. Take a few men to accompany you. Theon nodded, his expression resolute as he dipped his head to Rob in acknowledgement. Lady, he murmured quietly to Roslyn as he passed, his voice respectful. Roslyn offered a gentle nod in return, her eyes following him as he exited the tent. As Theon left, he passed by Catelyn Stark, who had just entered the tent. Her face was pale, her hair slightly disheveled, and she was dressed in a similar to Roslyn. She stood silently at the back of the tent, her presence quiet but powerful. Robb turned his attention back to the remaining lords. Lord Bolton, Lord Umber, Lord Hornwood, get some rest and then prepare your men to march at first light, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. The lords each gave their respects as they departed, nodding to Robb, his wife, and his mother before they exited the tent. The three of them remained in tense silence after the lords had departed, waiting until they were sure no one could overhear their conversation. "Is something happening?" Caitlin asked sharply, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized her son. "Nothing you need to be concerned with, Mother," Robb replied, his tone evasive as he turned to leave the tent. But Caitlin was quicker, stopping him with a firm hand pressed against his chest. "Since when am I no longer concerned by matters discussed by your council?" she demanded, her voice laced with frustration. Robb said nothing, his gaze fixed straight ahead as his mother searched his face for answers. After a few tense moments, Caitlin withdrew her hand, her expression hardening as she composed herself. She turned to Roslin, her voice now calmer but no less commanding. "Dear, would you please excuse us for a few moments?" Roslin hesitated but knew she had to comply, and she quickly began to move towards the entrance. Before she could, however, Robb caught her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "She will do no such thing, Mother. She is my wife, and anything you can say to me, you can say to her." Caitlin's eyes flashed with impatience. "This is not a game, Robb, and you are no longer a child," she snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. "There are lives at stake here, not just your father's and your sister's, but every single man in that camp. They are all looking to you." Her words were punctuated by a single finger pressed firmly against his chest. Roslin, taken aback by Caitlin's intensity, instinctively moved behind Robb, seeking some distance from the sudden outburst. She had never seen Caitlin react with such force, and the fierceness of her good mother's words left her unsettled. "At first light, we will move toward Harrenhal," Robb conceded, his voice firm but tinged with a trace of reluctance. "You and Lord Bolton will remain there with the majority of our forces, while Roslin and I, along with a few good men, will continue to King's Landing." Caitlin stared at him in disbelief, her voice rising with anger. "You cannot expect me to stay behind while you petition for my husband's life, for my daughter's lives." Robb turned to face her, his expression hardening. He was no longer the boy she once guided, but a man shouldering the weight of the North. "And tell me, Mother, what will you do if they say no?" he challenged, his voice steady and resolute. "What if Cersei looks you in the eyes and says you can have Sansa but not Arya? Who would you choose?" Caitlin's anger crumbled beneath the weight of his words, and instead of a retort, she collapsed into tears, her legs giving way as despair overtook her. Robb moved swiftly, catching her before she could fall, and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I will get them back, Mother, all of them. But you must trust me, and you must stay away," he whispered softly, his words a soothing balm to her grief. They remained locked in that embrace for several long minutes, until Caitlin's sobs subsided and she regained enough strength to stand again, aided by Roslin's gentle support. Robb held his mother's hands, his touch both reassuring and firm. "Get some sleep, Mother, or at least try to," he urged, his voice filled with concern. Turning to Roslin, he placed a tender kiss on her forehead. "Go to bed. I'll be with you shortly," he murmured, his tone softening as he spoke to her. With that, he stepped out into the cold night. Roslin prepared to follow, pausing only to offer a polite curtsy to Caitlin. But before she could leave, Caitlin's voice, choked with emotion, stopped her. "Roslin, I beg you, bring them home," she pleaded through her tears. Roslin turned back, her heart aching for the woman before her. She gave Caitlin a kind and wholehearted nod, her eyes filled with quiet determination. Then, with a final glance, she left Caitlin alone to her grief and devastation. Chapter 8, Robb 4. Chapter text. Robb 4. As Robb and Roslin approached the Dragon Gate, the looming entrance to King's Landing, Robb felt a heavy weight settle in his stomach. The excitement and exhilaration of the past weeks faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Until this moment, the campaign had felt more like a grand game than a life-or-death struggle. He had played the role of a lord on the march, issuing commands, chastising lords, and leading his men, all without facing any true hardship. He had married a beautiful woman and had been imagining his triumphant return to Winterfell as a hero. But now, as they approached the city that held so many dangers, the reality of the situation began to sink in. As they passed through the massive gateway, with Roslin by his side and their retinue trailing behind, Rob's eyes were drawn to a banner fluttering in the breeze, a black stag on a field of gold, the sigil of House Baratheon. Beneath the banner stood a dozen men, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. At the head of the group was a figure Rob had never met but recognized instantly, Petyr Baelish. His mother had spoken of Littlefinger often enough that Rob felt a strange familiarity with the man, despite never having laid eyes on him before. Dismounting from his horse, Rob handed the reins to one of his guards with a steady hand, though his nerves churned beneath the surface. Without acknowledging Baelish, he circled around his horse to where Roslin waited, her expression calm but her eyes show a hint of unease. Rob offered her his hand and helped her down with a practiced ease, masking his inner turmoil. He might be anxious, but he knew the importance of projecting confidence in a place as treacherous as King's Landing. Lord Stark Petyr Baelish greeted with a wide smirk, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and calculation. I have been most eagerly anticipating your arrival. Lord Baelish, my mother sends her best wishes, Rob replied, his voice steady as he guided Roslin forward, one hand resting protectively behind her back. How thoughtful of her. She was always the most caring of women, Baelish responded, his tone a delicate balance between genuine and mocking. His gaze then shifted to Roslin, his interest piqued. And who might this be, he asked, his eyes lingering on her. Allow me to introduce my wife, Lady Roslin Stark. Roslin, this is Lord Petyr Baelish, the King's Master of Coin, Rob said, his voice firm but polite. Baelish stepped forward, taking Roslin's hand with a practiced elegance. He brushed his lips briefly against her knuckles before straightening. Charmed, my lady. And you, my lord, Roslin replied with a graceful nod. Though we have met before. You attended my father's 7th wedding when you were a boy living at Riverrun, in Lord Tully's stead. I was only a young girl then, so I wouldn't expect you to remember. Baelish's smile grew, a touch of something sweet yet unsettling in it. I recall the wedding well, though I must admit, I do not remember you, my lady. However, I have heard quite a bit about your wedding. The tale of the young Stark lord who fell in love at first sight with a beautiful young woman and married her that very evening. A story fit for the singers and storytellers, no doubt, he added with a sly grin, clearly hinting that he knew the truth behind their hasty union. Indeed, Rob interjected, his tone sharp, cutting through the tension. And now, I would like to introduce my bride to my father. Can you assist me with that, Baelish? His question carried the weight of command, leaving little room for the man to maneuver. Petyr shifted his attention from Roslin to Rob, a sly smile spreading across his face. He let the moment linger before speaking again. Come, let us proceed to the Red Keep. There, you can reunite with your sister and prepare for your audience with the king and the Dowager Queen. I'm sure your lovely wife would welcome a bit of respite after such a long journey. I thought we might travel together in my litter, and the young Lady Stark can tell me all about how her father is faring. Roslin glanced at Rob, seeking reassurance before making any move. After a brief pause, Rob gave her a sharp nod, his expression firm. With that unspoken agreement, the three of them moved toward the compact wooden litter that awaited them, positioned just behind Baelish's men. ________. After a short journey that felt never-ending in the cramped litter, they finally arrived at the Red Keep. The towering, imposing castle loomed above them, larger and more intimidating than anything Rob had ever encountered. As they disembarked, Rob followed Baelish into the keep, listening as he directed the Stark men to find food and water for the group and their horses. When the party split, only a handful of guards remained with Rob and Roslin. He couldn't shake the unsettling realization that their numbers had steadily dwindled since leaving the twins. Baelish led them through a labyrinth of corridors and staircases, winding deeper into the heart of the keep. The maze seemed endless, the oppressive silence broken only by the echo of their footsteps. Eventually, they arrived at a large set of wooden doors. These will be your quarters for the duration of your stay in the capital, Baelish announced with a sweeping gesture toward the doors. I will see to it that your belongings are brought up, and someone will come to escort you to your audience with the king when he is ready. With that, Baelish offered a final, knowing glance before disappearing into the twisting depths of the castle. Rob pushed open the doors to the suite, revealing a room unlike anything he had ever seen. The space was vast, with windows offering sweeping views that stretched for miles over the city below. A ground bed dominated the room, alongside a polished desk and a small seating area. Seated delicately on one of the chairs, clearly awaiting their arrival, was Rob's sister, Sansa. She wore a deep red dress, her auburn hair styled in an elegant updo reminiscent of how Queen Cersei had worn hers during the royal procession to Winterfell. "Brother!" Sansa exclaimed, leaping to her feet and rushing into Rob's arms, embracing him tightly. "Sansa, are you all right? Have they harmed you?" Rob asked, his hand resting gently on her head as he returned her embrace, concern etched into his voice. "They won't let me see father or Arya," Sansa blurted out, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They say he's a traitor and that she misbehaved, so they've locked her in her chambers. Have you seen them? Did you get my letter?" "I received no letter," Rob replied, pulling back slightly to look into her worried eyes. "Why? What did it say?" "The Queen said I still have to marry Joffrey, but I don't want to," Sansa continued, her voice trembling. "He's a dreadful king, and he said father tried to steal his throne, but that can't be true. He told me you had to come to prove that not all Starks are traitors. I just want to go home. I want mother. Is she with you?" Her eyes searched behind Rob, desperate for a glimpse of Catelyn, but instead, they landed on Roslyn, who stood quietly at the entrance, hesitant to interrupt the siblings. "Sansa," Rob said firmly, his tone serious as he cupped her face in his hands, "I will find a way to free father, and we will go home. But you must be careful with your words. Joffrey is our king, and to say otherwise is treason. If anyone hears you, you could end up like father, or worse. Do you understand?" Sansa nodded, tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to her brother's warning. "The king has invited me here to discuss father's release," Rob continued, softening his tone. "Mother is waiting for us all at Harrenhal, and I swear we will all go home together." With a reassuring smile, Rob turned to Roslyn and said, "Now, Sansa, this is Roslyn, my wife. I'm counting on you to treat her as a sister." He gestured for Roslyn to step forward and join them, adding with a light chuckle, "Well, maybe not the way you treat Arya." "Lady Sansa," Roslyn said softly, taking the younger girl's hands in hers, "I think we're going to be firm friends." For the first time since Rob had reunited with her, Sansa smiled, a small but genuine glimmer of hope breaking through her fear and sorrow. "Sansa, when was the last time you saw Arya?" Rob asked as he settled into one of the seats, his tone gentle but urgent. Roslyn guided Sansa to sit on the bench opposite him, still holding her hands as if trying to lend her strength. "The day father was taken," Sansa replied, her voice trembling. "They came to our rooms, and they killed everyone, except Mordane, Jory, and I just ran. I should have stayed. I should have found Arya. I should have kept her safe." Her voice broke, and she began to weep, the weight of her guilt and fear overwhelming her. "You did the right thing," Sansa, Roslyn said, her voice full of warmth and understanding as she wrapped her arms around the girl, comforting her. "And where is Arya now? You said she was in her room. Who told you that?" Rob pressed gently, trying to piece together the situation. "My new maid," Sansa answered, her voice small and frightened. "I asked to see Arya so we could pray together for father and those who had passed, but she told me that Arya wasn't being given the privileges I was, that she had been locked in her room for disobedience. She warned me to behave, or the same would happen to me." Sansa's composure crumbled, and she broke down in hysterics. "Please, Roslyn, don't leave me alone here again," she pleaded, her desperation raw and palpable. Roslyn tightened her embrace, her voice soothing as she reassured the girl, "We're here now, Sansa, and we're not going anywhere. We'll face this together." A sharp rattle at the door abruptly interrupted their intimate moment. "Enter," Rob commanded, his voice steady and authoritative. A member of the King's Guard stepped into the room, his famous white armor and cloak gleaming. He was a man barely older than Rob, and his demeanor was serious and unyielding. "Lord Stark, the king and his mother are ready to receive you now," he announced. Rob rose to his feet, placing a reassuring hand on Sansa's head as he passed her. He moved to kiss Roslyn's hand, but before he could do so, the guard continued, "His Grace has asked that Lady Stark attend with you." Both Rob and Roslyn exchanged surprised glances, but eager to appease the boy king, Roslyn quickly stood. She promised Sansa they would return before she knew it, and then turned to one of the guards who had accompanied them to King's Landing. "Stay with her, and do not let her out of your sight," Roslyn instructed, her voice firm with concern. With that, she joined Robb, who addressed the King's Guard with a nod. "Show the way," he said, his tone resolute as they prepared to face whatever awaited them. The King's Guard led Robb and Roslyn down a grand staircase, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As they descended, they passed numerous servants, each one pausing to curtsy to Robb and his wife before hurrying back to their duties. A few minor lords and ladies also crossed their path, addressing Robb by name as they made their way through the keep. The familiarity unsettled him. This was a place utterly foreign to him, yet somehow these southerners seemed to know him. Perhaps they could sense the north in him, or perhaps his arrival had been more anticipated by the people of King's Landing than he had realized. They soon arrived at the Great Hall, a vast room that dwarfed even the Grand Hall of Winterfell. The enormous doors stood wide open, and as Robb peered inside, he saw the length of the room bathed in sunlight streaming through large windows. The light illuminated the path to the infamous Iron Throne, which loomed at the far end of the hall. The room was nearly empty, save for a few small figures near the throne, and Robb couldn't help but notice how barren the hall appeared. He had heard tales of the Red Keep's grandeur, of dragon skulls once lining the walls and statues of great kings, Aegon, Jaehaerys, Viserys, Egg, standing proudly in the corners. But now, the hall stood bare, with only banners hanging on the walls, half bearing the stag of House Baratheon, half the lion of House Lannister. As they made their way down the length of the room, Robb's eyes fixed on the figures ahead. King Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, tapping impatiently on its arm. The throne cast a dark shadow over him, and something about the sight of the boy perched upon it felt deeply wrong to Robb, unnatural and unsettling. At Joffrey's side stood his mother, the Dowager Queen Cersei, her gaze sharp and cold as it raked across the room to land on Robb. Seated on the stairs leading up to the throne was the king's uncle, Jaime Lannister, clad in his white and gold armor, his posture relaxed, as if he hadn't a care in the world. And stationed at every entrance, a member of the King's Guard stood at attention, each with a hand resting on the hilt of their sword, ready to act at a moment's notice. "Stark!" Joffrey's voice rang out, sharp and condescending, before Robb and Roslyn had even reached him. "I presume you've come to condemn your father and beg for my forgiveness." "Your Grace," Robb responded, inclining his head respectfully toward the boy king, while beside him, Roslyn dipped into a deep curtsy. "I have come to rectify any wrongdoings and hopefully reach terms with you." "There will be no terms for your father," Joffrey snapped, his youthful face twisted in anger. "He is a traitor, and I will have his head." Robb fought to keep his emotions in check, resisting the urge to retort angrily. Instead, he asked, "And what has my father done? What are these treacherous acts?" "Our late king, my love, King Robert, wasn't even cold when Eddard Stark began conspiring to place himself on the throne instead of our beloved Joffrey," Cersei interjected smoothly, her voice laced with venom. "He claimed that in King Robert's final moments, Robert had named him as Lord Protector until Joffrey came of age, but we also have intelligence that he was seeking support to place the pretender, Stannis Baratheon, on the throne in his stead. If this is true, I would need to speak to my father before offering any explanation, Your Grace," Robb said, addressing Cersei directly, trying to maintain a calm and diplomatic tone. "If?" Joffrey echoed, rising from the Iron Throne with a sudden fury. "If? Are you calling me a liar? Your father stood before me and claimed my throne for himself. I should have had his head weeks ago, along with your sister's." Robb felt his pulse quicken, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Speaking of my sister, I wish to see Arya," he said, sidestepping Joffrey's provocation. "Sansa mentioned she had misbehaved and was receiving punishment. I assure you, I will punish her myself for any wrongdoings once she is back in my care." "That girl is wild," Jaime Lannister chuckled from his relaxed position on the steps of the throne. "Everyone is safer if she remains where she is." "That may be," Robb replied, his voice firm, "but unless you plan to accuse her of any crime, you have no right to keep her from me." Joffrey began to descend from the throne, his steps slow and deliberate as he approached them. "I wanted to see you in person," he said to Roslyn, his tone suddenly turning unsettlingly soft. "They said you were beautiful, but they haven't done you justice." He reached out, his hand moving to stroke her face, but Robb stepped between them, his eyes blazing with restrained fury. Please, your grace, Robb said through gritted teeth, barely managing to contain his anger. You invited me here to discuss terms. There must be some way we can resolve this and both leave content. I did no such thing, Joffrey sneered, stepping back with a dismissive gesture. It was my mother's petition that brought you here. You see, Stark, you're a boy, not a real lord, and as long as your father lives, you'll never become one. I am the king, and you will remain here until I decide otherwise. Your father will remain my prisoner, your sister will become my bride, and I might even take your wife just because I can. There's nothing you can do because no one breathes in this castle until I say so. If you're lucky, I might let you live. Joffrey began to stride past them, heading toward the exit of the hall. Lord Stark will remain in his rooms until I say otherwise, he commanded over his shoulder. Joffrey, please, Cersei called after him, her voice a mix of authority and concern. And bring Lady Stark to my quarters, Joffrey added, turning back with a leering wink directed at Roslyn. Robb's fury boiled over, but before he could act, Roslyn squeezed his hand, her touch grounding him. He won't touch me, I swear, she whispered, her voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. With that, the Kingsguard stepped forward, separating Robb and Roslyn and leading them in different directions, their fates now in the hands of a mad boy king. Chapter 9, Roslyn 4. Chapter text. Roslyn 4. As Roslyn made her way through the seemingly endless corridors of the Red Keep, a wave of nausea gripped her. Each step toward the king's chambers felt like an eternity, the oppressive silence and cold stone walls only heightening her unease. All she longed for was to return to Robb, to feel the warmth of his embrace, the way his presence always calmed her. But instead, she was trapped in this lonely march toward uncertainty, flanked by two silent Kingsguard soldiers. They walked with rigid formality, their eyes never meeting hers, offering neither a word of reassurance nor even a fleeting glance of sympathy. When they finally arrived at their destination, one of the guards pushed open the heavy wooden doors with a forceful shove. The grand chamber that lay beyond was overwhelming. If Roslyn had thought her rooms with Robb in the Red Keep were luxurious, this was an entirely different realm of opulence. The walls were draped in rich red velvet, every surface gleaming with gold fixtures and ornate embellishments. The air felt thick with the weight of wealth and power. At the far end of the room, a grand balcony beckoned, offering a breathtaking view of the sprawling city below. Eventually, Roslyn's eyes fell upon the king, lounging carelessly on a lavishly cushioned, reclined sofa. His gaze was sharp and unrelenting, burning into her as if daring her to speak first. The air between them crackled with tension, a silent battle for control, neither willing to yield. But it was Roslyn who broke the stalemate, recalling Robb's urgent words to his mother, that everything must be done to appease the royal family. In that moment, she couldn't help but wonder just how far the king intended to push those boundaries. Your Grace, she murmured, her voice steady despite the unease swirling within her, and she dipped into a deep, graceful curtsy. Lady Stark, Joffrey replied, sitting upright as he regarded her with a sly smirk. Please, come sit next to me. His hand patted the space beside him on the sofa, a gesture that felt less like an invitation and more like a command disguised as civility. Every fiber of Roslyn's being screamed at her not to obey, but she knew all too well that she held no power to refuse him. Reluctantly, against her better judgment, she moved to sit beside the boy king. Joffrey was the same age as Roslyn, yet to her, he felt much younger, like a child playing at being a ruler, testing the boundaries of his newfound power with reckless abandon. In contrast, Roslyn had always been mature beyond her years, and the last month being with Robb had made her feel she had finally stepped fully into womanhood. I've heard stories about you free girls, Joffrey began, his tone dripping with cruelty masked by false charm. My uncle Jaime said you were as ugly as hounds, but you are beautiful. You are too kind, Your Grace, Roslyn replied softly, though there was no warmth in her words. She perched on the very edge of the sofa, keeping as much distance between them as possible. Yet Joffrey, undeterred, edged closer, his presence oppressive. He hovered just a breath away from touching her, and Roslyn could feel the tension tightening in her chest, every instinct urging her to flee, though she knew she couldn't. I always wondered what it was like, Joffrey mused, his voice carrying a sickening curiosity. All of you girls, so close together in those cramped rooms at the height of youth. Tell me, did you ever act on any urges with your sisters? Roslyn flinched as his hand slowly traced a path along her arm, his touch deliberate and teasing. It was delicate, too delicate. Somehow, the softness of it made her wish he would just hurt her outright if that was his intent. The anticipation was far worse, the waiting for a cruelty that hadn't yet come. She understood the implication of his question but doubted whether he even believed his own words. He was simply testing her, pushing her boundaries to see how far she would bend. "Of course not, Your Grace," Rosalind replied, forcing a slyness into her voice she didn't feel. She knew that to survive this moment, she had to play along, to let Joffrey believe he held the upper hand. As much as it pained her, she understood that flirting back, letting him think he was winning, was her only option. Though she added, her tone shifting ever so slightly, "I did spend many nights waiting for a man to steal me away. And tell me, did Robb Stark disappoint?" Joffrey pressed, his tone laced with mockery as his fingers moved to her hair. He played with the ends, twisting strands around his fingers, the gesture deceptively tender. "I must admit, I was surprised when I heard the young wolf had taken a free to bed. But then I saw you and, well, who could blame him? I'm shocked your father didn't keep you for himself. I've heard he has a taste for beautiful young girls, and I doubt being related would stop him." Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. She had expected cruelty, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. The accusation was vile, disgusting. Her father may have been a monster, but to suggest he would pursue his own daughter was revolting. In that moment, Joffrey's nature became startlingly clear to her. He didn't just crave power, he thrived on breaking people, on watching them squirm under his twisted games. Robb's defiance in the hall must have bored him, Rosalind realized. Joffrey wanted retaliation, or worse, anger, but it was all temporary. It was easy for him to do before moving on to the next person. She had to be unbreakable, unreadable, if she was to survive this. She needed to turn the game on him. "Well, Your Grace," she responded, her voice smooth despite the storm raging inside her. She had watched Walder with the men that would visit the twins. She knew how to play the seductress even if she had never done it herself. "Robb Stark is just a boy. And as for my father..." She trailed off, forcing a small, knowing smile as she met Joffrey's eyes. "Some things even he knows better than to touch." Her words were carefully chosen, giving nothing away, letting Joffrey believe he had the upper hand while quietly reclaiming her power as she rested her hand on his thigh. Joffrey's eyes flickered with interest at her response, his fingers pausing for a brief moment in her hair before resuming their slow, almost affectionate twisting. Rosalind could see the wheels turning behind his gaze, trying to decipher whether her words were submission or a veiled challenge. He thrived on weakness, but she had given him none, not yet. His smile widened, though it didn't reach his eyes, and he leaned in ever so slightly, their faces now only inches apart. "A boy, you say?" Joffrey echoed, his tone light but underpinned with malice. "And what does that make you, Lady Stark? You seem far more experienced than a simple girl from the twins. Perhaps you've grown tired of your wolf already. I wonder, do you find yourself longing for something more? Or someone more fitting of your beauty?" Rosalind felt his thigh tense beneath her hand as he spoke, as if the very thought of power over her excited him. His words dripped with a mix of arrogance and cruelty, a taunt meant to lure her into revealing more, into cracking under the pressure of his relentless probing. But Rosalind remained steady, her heart pounding in her chest though her exterior was composed, even serene. She knew she couldn't react the way he wanted, couldn't give him the satisfaction of her discomfort. Instead, she leaned ever so slightly closer, her hand still resting lightly on his thigh, as if to play along with the dangerous game he was weaving. "Longing," she mused, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Your Grace, what I desire is far beyond the reach of most men. But I've learned that boys in power, even kings, often think they understand a woman's heart." Her eyes stayed locked on his, unflinching, though her tone was laced with enough ambiguity to keep him intrigued, unsettled. "You see, the wolf may be young, but his teeth are sharp. And I am not so easily tamed." Joffrey's smirk faltered, only for a moment, as he searched for the deeper meaning behind her words. The tension between them thickened, the air electric with the unspoken battle for control. She could feel his frustration simmering beneath the surface. He wanted her to flinch, to break, but instead, she held firm. "Perhaps," Joffrey said slowly, withdrawing his hand from her hair and sitting back slightly, his expression darkening. But we'll see how long that sharpness lasts when you've been at court long enough. Everyone breaks eventually, Lady Stark. Rosalind smiled faintly, but there was steel behind it. Perhaps, Your Grace, she replied softly, but some of us are far harder to break than others. Joffrey's gaze darkened further, a flash of irritation in his eyes. He wasn't accustomed to resistance, especially not from someone in such a vulnerable position. Rosalind's calm defiance was a puzzle he hadn't anticipated, and it gnawed at him. His hand, which had fallen idle by his side, clenched slightly before relaxing again as he leaned back into the sofa, pretending to be unaffected. You speak boldly for a woman so far from home, Joffrey remarked, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. But you'll find that in King's Landing, boldness can be costly. Rosalind's heart raced, but outwardly, she remained poised. She knew that every word, every glance had to be calculated. Joffrey thrived on the fear he instilled in others, but she had learned in this brief exchange that his power crumbled when confronted with unshakable composure. She couldn't let him see the fear that coiled within her, the dread that had taken root the moment she stepped into the room. I've learned to pay the price for boldness, Your Grace, she replied, her tone smooth as silk. But I've also learned that fear and obedience often cost much more. She withdrew her hand from his thigh slowly, deliberately, as if to signal that she would not play the game on his terms. The question is, what do you value more, loyalty born from respect, or submission born from fear? Joffrey's expression twisted slightly, as though the notion of respect was foreign to him, or worse, unimportant. He shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he regarded her with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. You think you're clever, don't you? Joffrey's voice dropped, cold and venomous. No wonder the wolf fancies you. Listen, Lady Stark, if I want you, I'll take you, and nothing will stop me. His eyes gleamed with malice as he leaned in closer. Maybe I'll have your lord husband's head to go along with his father's. How would you like that, Lady Stark? How would you like to be my queen? With sudden force, he grabbed her face, his grip hard and unyielding, fingers digging into her skin. He held her there, his gaze cruel and predatory, before pushing her back, releasing her from his hold. Or perhaps you'll just be my whore, he sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. I wouldn't want someone another man has already had as my bride. Rosalind met Joffrey's eyes, her pulse steady despite the fire burning beneath her skin. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. Every moment she remained unbroken, she could see his frustration simmering beneath the surface. His need to control, to dominate, was tangible, but she would not let him win. If you want to break me, Your Grace, she said softly, her voice calm but edged with steel, you'll need to do more than threats and cruelty. I've already seen what real power is, what real strength looks like, and it's not the fear you try to wield. It's earned, not forced. You speak like a woman with nothing to lose. I wonder how much of that is true. His fingers brushed against her arm again as he once again closed the distance between them, this time with slight pressure, a reminder of his control. We shall see, Lady Stark. The court can be unpredictable. It can make or break anyone who dares to think they are untouchable. Rosalind felt the weight of his words but refused to let them settle. Instead, she held his gaze, unflinching, her chin lifted just slightly in defiance. I'll remember that, Your Grace. The tension between them hung in the air like a drawn blade, neither willing to fully concede, each waiting for the other to make the final move. But Rosalind knew that at this moment, she had survived, at least for now. She had danced through the fire and come out unburnt. Joffrey's smirk returned, more calculating this time. You may go now, he said dismissively, waving a hand as though she were nothing more than a minor amusement. But don't stray too far, Lady Stark. We're not done yet. Rosalind rose gracefully, her heart pounding in her chest as she dipped into a formal curtsy. Of course, Your Grace. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door, her back straight, her steps steady despite the tremor of relief threatening to overtake her. As the door closed behind her, she allowed herself a single breath of reprieve. She had faced the lion in his den and lived to tell the tale. But she knew this was only the beginning, and Joffrey's games were far from over. Chapter 10, Cersei. Chapter text. Cersei I. Cersei had been waiting in her chambers for hours, pacing in the dim candlelight as the shadows danced across the richly adorned walls. She had instructed the King's Guard to bring Joffrey to her as soon as he finished his meeting with Roslyn Stark, but each passing moment only deepened the gnawing anxiety that had settled in her chest. Cersei had faced countless challenges throughout her life, scheming courtiers, treacherous family members, and enemies on all sides, but nothing unnerved her like the unpredictability of her eldest son. Joffrey had always been difficult, even as a child, cruel, willful, and relentless in his pursuit of power. She had once been able to rein him in, to control his temper and guide his impulses, but now, seated on the Iron Throne, Joffrey was beyond her grasp. The crown had magnified his worst tendencies, and there was little she could do to manage him now. His whims were no longer the tantrums of a boy, they were the commands of a king. Her plan to bring Robb Stark to King's Landing had been a calculated move, one aimed at securing the North's loyalty in the battle for the throne. With Renly and Stannis looming as threats, the Stark alliance was crucial. Any hope of swaying Eddard Stark had vanished when he learned the truth about her children, but Robb was young, impressionable and most importantly desperate. She believed he could be molded, shaped into something useful, someone who could be swayed to her cause at least until the main threats had been dealt with. But that delicate strategy could unravel with a single stroke of Joffrey's recklessness. If he harmed Robb or, worse, took his father's head, the Starks would never support the Lannisters. Instead, they would turn to Renly or Stannis, and that could spell disaster. Cersei had allowed Joffrey certain liberties, letting him think he held the reins of power. It was crucial for her to make him feel in control, even if she was the one doing the real work behind the scenes. That was why she had tolerated his public scolding of Robb and why she hadn't interfered when he tormented Sansa. But Roslyn Stark posed a different problem. Cersei feared how far Joffrey would go with her. If he hurt Roslyn, if he went too far, their fragile alliance with Robb would shatter, and with it, any hope of securing the North. She clenched her hands, her nails digging into her palms, willing herself to stay calm. She knew her son's nature better than anyone. He craved power, control, and above all, the pleasure of breaking those beneath him. And yet, Cersei also knew that she had to find a way to keep him in check without directly challenging him, for that would only incite his defiance. Moments later, Joffrey stormed into the room, his expression thunderous, flanked by his personal guards. He shoved the doors open with a force that sent them slamming against the walls. "I am not a dog to be summoned, mother," he spat, his voice sharp with venom. "I am your king. Now, what is so urgent that I had to be disturbed?" Cersei remained composed and seated herself at the table, her golden hair gleaming in the candlelight. She gestured subtly toward the chair across from her, an unspoken command for him to sit. "I wanted to speak with you about your time with Roslyn Stark," she said smoothly, keeping her tone light, as though this were a casual conversation. "She's a beautiful girl. I can understand why she might have caught your eye." Joffrey glowered but, begrudgingly, took the seat she had indicated. He slouched into the chair, his irritation evident in the sharp lines of his face. "I have no interest in her," he snapped, the disdain dripping from his words. "She's plain and unremarkable. Why would you think I'd waste my time on someone like her?" His lips curled into a sneer as he poured himself a goblet of wine. "When I toy with her, it bothers him," he continued, the gleam of cruelty flickering in his eyes. "That's all there is to it." Cersei studied her son closely, her face revealing little as she chose her next words with care. She didn't believe him, not entirely, but she knew better than to challenge his pride directly. "Of course," she replied, her voice measured, as though she accepted his explanation. "But I wanted to remind you just how important Robb Stark is to our cause. Without him, our chances against your uncles. I don't need him." Joffrey barked, cutting her off, his face contorted with anger. He slammed his fist against the table, making the goblet tremble. "I will have Renly and Stannis heads on spikes with or without Robb Stark. I am the king, mother. I don't need anyone." Cersei's jaw tightened, but she remained calm, her eyes never leaving his. The raw arrogance of her son was dangerous, volatile, even, but now wasn't the time to confront him head-on. "Of course, Your Grace," she said softly, a practiced smile curving her lips, "but even kings must choose their allies wisely." Robb Stark may prove more useful than you realize. Joffrey scoffed, draining his wine with a dismissive wave. The tension between them hung thick in the air, and Cersei knew that controlling her son's impulses was becoming increasingly difficult. But she also knew the importance of subtlety. To guide Joffrey, she had to let him believe he was in charge, all while carefully maneuvering the real pieces on the board behind the scenes. "All I suggest is that we appease the Starks," Cersei said, her voice smooth as she leaned across the table, taking her son's hands in hers. She kept her tone soft and soothing, trying to coax him into seeing reason. "Give them Eddard and both of the girls. They are all insignificant pieces in the grander game. In return, the Stark boy and his army can join your grandfather's cause against our enemies. It's a sacrifice that will secure our position, Joffrey." "No!" Joffrey roared, yanking his hands away as he shot up from his chair, eyes blazing with fury. "Ned Stark is a traitor, and I will have his head." His fists clenched as his whole body radiated anger, his temper flaring like wildfire. Cersei remained seated, unflinching, though her grip on her patience tightened. "I agree, my dear," she replied, her voice calm and even, trying to soothe the storm brewing within him. "Eddard Stark cannot be trusted. But if you take his head, we sever any hope of controlling the Starks. We don't need him dead, we need his power gone. Let me handle it." Joffrey's gaze narrowed, his face hardening in stubborn defiance. "As long as Ned Stark breathes, he holds power," he snapped, venom lacing his words. Cersei stood slowly, her movements deliberate and graceful, as she approached her son. She kept her eyes on him, her expression softening into one of reassurance, a mother soothing her child's fears. "Listen to me," she said quietly but firmly, "I have a plan. A way to protect us from your uncles and, in time, to be rid of the Starks altogether. All I need is your leave to do what must be done." Joffrey stared at her, his jaw clenched as his eyes flickered with doubt. For a moment, the silence between them stretched, heavy and charged. He was weighing her words, his pride warring with the remnants of reason she had planted in his mind. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Do it," he said, his voice sharp, as though he was granting her a trivial request. He turned on his heel, storming toward the door, the conversation seemingly over. But just as he reached the doorway, Joffrey paused. He looked back at his mother, his expression darker, more calculating. "One more thing," he added, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "I want the girl, Roslyn. She isn't to leave." And with that, he strode out, the heavy doors closing behind him, leaving Cersei alone once more in the quiet of her chambers. Cersei stood still for a long moment, her gaze lingering on the door where Joffrey had disappeared, her mind already spinning with the implications of his final demand. Roslyn Stark. Robb Stark's wife. The girl Joffrey wanted to keep as another pawn in his twisted game. This was no longer just a matter of manipulating alliances, now it was personal. The following morning, Cersei made the short but deliberate journey from the royal apartments to the chambers that housed Robb Stark and his wife. Her expression was cold, her resolve steely, she knew precisely what needed to be done. As she arrived at the door, she waited, composed, while a Stark guard announced her presence. "The Queen," the man called out, his voice echoing through the room. Cersei entered, her eyes sweeping across the space. Robb Stark was seated at a heavy desk, surrounded by maps, papers, and books. Sansa Stark sat quietly on a sofa near the window, her face pale and distant, a shadow of the girl she once was. Cersei knew from Myrtle, Sansa's maid, that the young girl had barely left her brother's side, clinging to him for some semblance of comfort in this foreign and hostile court. Sansa stood quickly upon Cersei's arrival, her movements nervous, as though she had been startled from deep thought. She offered a quick, shaky curtsy. "Your Grace." Cersei smiled, but it was a practiced, calculated expression. "Hello, little dove," she said smoothly. "Will you be a dear and join Myrtle in your rooms? She's been searching for you all morning." Sansa hesitated, her uncertainty clear as she glanced toward her brother. Robb, still seated, gave her a slight nod of approval, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Reluctantly, Sansa obeyed, casting one last glance over her shoulder before leaving the room. As the door closed behind her, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Cersei now stood alone with the young wolf, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she prepared for the delicate conversation to come. "How can I be of service, Your Grace?" Robb said, rising from his desk and moving to stand in front of it, leaning back against its edge with an air of quiet strength. His eyes were guarded, his stance tense but composed, as if bracing for the inevitable. Cersei gave him a measured smile, her voice softening as she began. "I would like to apologize for Joffrey's behavior yesterday." She knew the importance of false pleasantries when dealing with the Stark honor, and she needed to win Robb over from the start. He is a young boy, still struggling with the loss of his father, and suddenly burdened with more responsibility than he knows how to handle. He isn't coping well, which I would think you, of all people, might understand. Robb's jaw tightened, and he shot back, "My father isn't dead." "No," Cersei conceded, her voice smooth, eyes narrowing ever so slightly, "but he is lost to you." She let the words hang in the air, calculating her next move carefully. "It must be difficult, is all I'm saying. After all, you were only a boy 2 moons ago, and now you're a man, a lord, a husband. So many lives depend on you, and you've had such little time to adjust. The weight of it all. I imagine it is heavy." Robb's face remained unreadable, his silence thickening the air between them. Yet Cersei could sense the strain behind his composure, the effort it took for him to maintain that stark stoicism. She studied him carefully, aware that beneath his hardened exterior was a young man grappling with the immense pressures of war, family, and duty. All she had to do was find the right moment to exploit it. Cersei, ever watchful, took a slow step forward, her gaze never leaving his. "I understand what it means to rule," she said softly, her voice as smooth as silk. "I know the loneliness of it. You have people around you, counselors, allies, your wife, but at the end of the day, the decisions rest with you. You alone carry the burden of their consequences. Joffrey lashes out because he knows he doesn't know what to do, he's afraid. But you. I can see you've learned to control it. You've grown quickly." Robb's eyes flickered, just for a moment, betraying a hint of the exhaustion beneath his defiant exterior. He didn't respond, but Cersei knew she had struck a nerve. The Stark boy was far too proud to admit it, but he was still young, still struggling to navigate a world that demanded so much from him so quickly. She took another step closer, her voice softening as if she were offering him a rare moment of understanding. "I imagine Roslyn has been a great comfort to you in this time. Where is she now?" The mention of his wife was a subtle move, but Cersei knew it would draw him in further. She watched him carefully for any reaction. "She has gone into the city for some new dresses with some of our guards. In our haste to marry, she didn't have a chance to get any new gowns fitting a lady," he said, accepting there was no need to give any hostility at this moment. "Ah, I see," Cersei murmured. "Such a pretty girl. I understand your haste in taking her to wife." Robb's brow furrowed, and his expression hardened again, though Cersei caught the briefest flash of concern in his eyes. "What do you want, Your Grace?" he asked, his voice firm but cautious, cutting through her attempt at sympathy. Cersei smiled, as though she had anticipated the question all along. "I want to ensure that we avoid any unnecessary conflict between our houses," she said smoothly. "I know Joffrey's actions have put a strain on things, but we still have a common enemy in Renly and Stannis. I would hate for any misunderstanding to ruin the opportunity for an alliance that would benefit us both." Robb crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "And what misunderstanding would that be?" Cersei let a beat of silence pass before answering. "Joffrey has taken an interest in your wife," she said, her tone light, almost casual, though she watched his reaction closely. "He's a boy who likes to play games, and sometimes those games can escalate. I wanted to ensure you that I will do everything in my power to keep him in check. But you must understand that as Queen Mother, there are limits to my influence now that he sits on the throne." Robb's jaw clenched visibly, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "Roslyn is under my protection," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "If Joffrey so much as lays a hand on her." Cersei raised a hand, cutting him off with a calm, practiced grace. "I'm not here to make threats, Lord Stark. I am here to prevent them. We both know what's at stake. Warring with each other would weaken us all, and none of us can afford to show weakness in the face of the Baratheons." She took a step back, giving him space, as though she were offering him control. I only ask that you keep your head, as you have been doing so well. Let me handle Joffrey. I can manage him better if there are no rash actions on either side. After all, your wife's safety depends on it. Robb's gaze darkened, but his silence lingered, and Cersei could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn, not wanting to bend to her will, but knowing that to act rashly could endanger more than just his pride. His family, his wife, everything was at risk. Cersei reached into the folds of her gown, her movements slow and deliberate, and withdrew a folded piece of parchment. With a practiced elegance, she placed it gently on the desk beside Robb, her eyes watching him intently. That, she said smoothly, her voice laced with calm authority, is a royal pardon for your father. Robb hesitated for a moment before snatching up the parchment, his heart pounding as he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the paper quickly, and to his shock, he saw the royal seal of Joffrey Baratheon at the bottom. The document was real. Signed by the king himself for your father's immediate release, Cersei added, her voice almost too sweet as if savoring the moment. Robb's breath hitched as he continued to read, his pulse quickening. His father, free. It was more than he could have hoped for, more than he dared believe. For the briefest of moments, hope flared in his chest. This is not an empty gesture, Lord Stark, Cersei said, her tone softening as she observed the mix of emotions flashing across his face. By nightfall, your father will walk free. Robb's hand tightened around the parchment, his gaze snapping up to meet hers, wary, as if waiting for the blow that must surely follow. But Cersei continued, her smile barely touching her eyes, there are conditions. Robb stopped reading, his eyes narrowing. The warmth of hope quickly chilled into suspicion as he studied her, knowing that any offer from Cersei Lannister came at a cost. Cersei's voice remained steady as she laid out the terms with cold precision. Your father will be free to return to the north once he offers a full apology for his unfortunate comments, she said smoothly, eyes never leaving Robb's face. He must publicly denounce Renly and Stannis as claimants to the throne and swear allegiance to Joffrey as his rightful king. Only then will he be allowed to live out the rest of his days at Winterfell. Robb listened, his jaw tight, though despite his best efforts, a small, involuntary smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The thought of his father, free and alive, back in the north where he belonged, was almost more than he dared hope for. But Cersei continued, her voice cutting through his momentary relief like a blade, he will no longer be Lord Paramount of the North. He will relinquish all his titles, hold no councils, and raise no banners. He will lead no armies. Her eyes glinted as she added, and should he ever leave the North without express permission from the king, he will face the king's justice. Robb's expression hardened, but he understood. His father, once the Warden of the North, would be a shadow of the man he was. A figurehead, no longer a leader. Ned Stark's ability to rally men was too dangerous in the eyes of the crown, and they intended to strip him of that power. His father's pride would be wounded, his mother's heart shattered, but he would live. To Robb, it was a sacrifice worth making. And what of his titles? Robb asked cautiously. You, Cersei said, her eyes locking onto his, will take his place as Lord of Winterfell, and from this day forward, assume all the responsibilities and titles of House Stark. Robb clenched his fist, absorbing the gravity of the offer. The power to lead House Stark, to protect his people, at the cost of his father's legacy. And the girls? Robb asked, his voice tight. What of Sansa and Arya? Sansa is the future queen, Cersei said with an air of finality. She must remain in King's Landing where she belongs. Robb's mouth opened to protest, but before he could challenge her, Cersei pressed on. As for Arya, she's free to return to the north with your father. That girl is not suited for the south, and frankly, I'll be glad to be rid of her. Robb's lips tightened at the casual dismissal of his younger sister. I would like Sansa to return home with us, he stated firmly, though he knew he was treading dangerous ground. She's still very young. She belongs with her family. Cersei's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Lord Stark, you must understand that your family's position is delicate. Rejecting a royal proposal now would be unwise. Her tone was silky, but the threat was unmistakable. I agree that Sansa's temperament is softer than I would have liked, and perhaps delaying the wedding until she matures is in order. A closer relationship with the new Lady Stark may do her some good. Robb bristled at the idea of leaving his sister in the clutches of the Lannisters any longer, but now was not the time for rash decisions. He knew Sansa was not ready to face this alone, but first, he needed to secure his father's release. There was no point in freeing Ned only to provoke a new disaster with Sansa. The time to challenge the Lannisters would come, but not yet. Cersei, sensing his restraint, smiled faintly. "Of course, all of this depends on your support, Lord Stark," she added, her voice dripping with sweet persuasion. "Without you and your forces, the war against Stannis and Renly will drag on, and many will perish. But with your support, we could end it swiftly. Think of how many lives that could save." Her words were a trap, Robb knew, but at this moment, he had no choice but to navigate it carefully. "I will do as my King Joffrey bids me," Robb said, his voice strained as he spoke through gritted teeth. "Good," Cersei said, her tone smooth but unyielding. "You will, of course, need to swear allegiance to Joffrey as the new Lord Paramount of the North. Once that is done, you can rejoin your host at Harrenhal, where Lord Tywin will meet you." She paused, a calculating look in her eyes. "Your wife can remain here in King's Landing to mentor Sansa. She's a lovely girl, not suited for life as a camp follower, wouldn't you agree? It's safer for her here in the capital, and you can be reunited once the war is over." Robb's anger flared. "Roslyn is my wife," he snapped. "I won't leave her here alone. I may be young, but I am not ignorant. I know what this place is." Cersei's gaze was cold as she replied, "That may be true, but consider what it would be like for her. The only woman in a camp full of soldiers who haven't seen a woman in weeks, perhaps months. Imagine their eyes on her, and then, when battle comes, she would be left waiting in uncertainty, not knowing if you or Stannis or Renly will return. What do you think Stannis would do to the traitor Stark's wife?" Her words were meant to cut, and they did, underscoring the peril Roslyn would face. Robb's jaw tightened, the harsh reality of his choices becoming ever clearer. Robb's expression hardened as Cersei's words sunk in. He could almost see the grim picture she painted, Roslyn alone in a hostile city, surrounded by dangers he couldn't control. "Do you think this is easy for me?" he growled, his voice low and fierce. Cersei's eyes narrowed with a glint of satisfaction. "Sometimes, sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The sooner you accept the terms, the sooner you can return to your duties and ensure that your father's release becomes a reality." Robb clenched his fists, fighting to maintain his composure. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing heavily upon him. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice taut with defiance. "What then?" Cersei's smile was thin and unfeeling. "Refuse, and not only will your father's release be jeopardized, but you'll also find yourself without allies. You're in a precarious position, Lord Stark. Any resistance might cost you more than you're willing to lose." Robb's mind raced, weighing his options. He knew that refusing Cersei's terms could mean the end of any hope for his father's freedom, and perhaps even more catastrophic consequences. Yet the thought of leaving Roslyn behind was a bitter pill to swallow. Cersei continued, her voice taking on a more coaxing tone. "Think of what you can gain, Lord Stark. With your father's freedom and your allegiance to Joffrey, you will be positioned as a key player in the forthcoming battles. Your support could turn the tide in our favor. Isn't that worth a temporary separation from your wife?" Robb met her gaze, his expression conflicted. He wanted to argue, to refuse, but he had to ensure his father's safety and secure his position. Finally, he exhaled sharply, the fight draining from him. "Very well," he said, his voice weary. "I will swear my allegiance to Joffrey and accept the terms." Cersei's smile widened slightly, a victory etched into her features. "Excellent. I will have the necessary documents prepared for you. And remember, once this war is over, you will have your wife back, and your father will be free to live out his days in the north, as promised." With that, Cersei turned to leave, her steps measured and confident. She knew that in this one decision, the war had truly begun. Chapter 11, Robb v. Chapter text. Robb v. It was late in the evening as Robb sat in his chambers, the fire burning low in the hearth, casting shadows across the room. He had been alone since Cersei's visit, as Roslyn had spent the day with Sansa whilst he dealt with the more pressing matters. The door opened quietly, and Rosalind stepped inside. Her face, pale and drawn with concern, lit up when she saw him, though there was an unease in her eyes. She crossed the room, her footsteps soft against the stone floor, and stood before him. "Rob," she asked, her voice tentative. "I heard the Queen visited you. Is everything all right?" He looked up at her, feeling the weight of what he had to tell her. "Come here," he said softly, reaching out to her. Rosalind hesitated for a moment, sensing the gravity in his voice, before moving to sit beside him. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a familiar, comforting gesture, but his expression was distant. "The Queen came to discuss certain terms," Rob began, struggling to find the right words. "Joffrey has agreed to pardon my father." Rosalind's eyes widened in surprise, hope flickering briefly across her face. "Truly? Your father, he'll be free?" Rob nodded, but the hesitation in his expression stopped her short from celebrating. "What's wrong?" "There are conditions," he said, his voice low and measured. "My father will be allowed to return to Winterfell, but only after he swears fealty to Joffrey, denounces Renly and Stannis, and relinquishes his title as Lord of the North. He'll be stripped of all power, just a man in his keep." Rosalind sat in stunned silence, her eyes searching his for more. But that's better than." "Yes," Rob cut her off, his voice harsher than he intended. He took a breath, softening his tone. "Yes, it's better than losing him altogether." "The Queen wants me to swear allegiance to Joffrey," Rob continued, the bitterness of the words sharp in his mouth. "I'll take my father's place as Lord of Winterfell and the North." Rosalind reached for his face, her touch soft and reassuring. "He's your father, Rob," she whispered, her voice soothing. "He'll understand." "But to take his place, but I don't see any other way," Rosalind Rob admitted quietly. "I can't risk my father's life any longer." She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the gravity of the decision. "If it keeps your father alive, then perhaps it's the right choice." Rob's jaw tightened, his hand gripping hers more firmly. "There's more. Cersei, she has denied my request to bring Sansa home, and you must stay with her in King's Landing." Rosalind's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening. "What? No. She believes you should stay here with Sansa, to mentor her," Rob interrupted, his frustration building. "To keep you safe from the dangers of war, or so she says." Rosalind shook her head, her voice trembling with rising panic. "But, Rob, you know that isn't true. The king has taken an interest in me, and I fear what he might do if you're not here to protect me." "I know," Rob said quietly, his voice strained with the weight of the situation. His eyes locked onto hers, steady but filled with regret. "But Cersei's painted a different picture, one of the dangers you'd face if you came with me. The war, the soldiers. She's manipulating us, I know that, but you're considering it," Rosalind whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. Rob stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What choice do I have? You've seen the kind of games they play here, how dangerous it is. I don't want to leave you here, but how can I take you to a battlefield? If something happens to you? And what if something happens to me here?" Rosalind snapped, rising to her feet. "I'd rather face the dangers by your side than be trapped in this den of snakes." He turned to her, his eyes pained. "I know you're frightened, but think about what Cersei said. Joffrey. He has his eyes on you. If he wants to hurt me, he'll do it through you. He'll use you to control me. I can't protect you if we're fighting battles across the realm." Rosalind stepped closer to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I can't protect you if I'm locked away here. Rob, I don't want to be a pawn in their games. If you leave me here, who knows what they'll do? What Joffrey will do." Rob clenched his fists, torn between his duty to keep her safe and his deep fear of what could happen in King's Landing. He looked down at her, feeling the weight of her plea pressing on his heart. "I don't know what to do," Rob admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his uncertainty. "I don't know how to keep you safe." Rosalind turned back to him, her emotions swirling between fear and anger, though she was fighting to remain calm. "Rob," she began, her voice steady but tense. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." She hesitated, the words caught in her throat. "This morning, when I woke, I felt suddenly sick, and then, her voice faltered, apprehension tightening her features. In the city, the dressmaker asked if I knew that. Knew what? Rob interrupted, startled by her sudden change in demeanor. He quickly rose from his chair and joined her at the window, where she now stood, her back tense with worry. If I knew that I was with child, Rosalind finally whispered, her voice fragile, as though speaking the words made them more real. She said she's seen enough ladies in the early stages to tell. She searched his face, desperately seeking a reaction, any reaction. Rob stood frozen, the weight of her words crashing over him like a tidal wave. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he couldn't find his voice. The thought of Rosalind carrying their child, their future, amidst the chaos and uncertainty of war shook him to his core. He reached out, cupping her face gently in his hands, his thumb brushing her cheek as if to ground himself in the reality of the moment. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, a mixture of awe and fear. Rosalind nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. "That's what she said, and I feel it. I didn't want to believe it at first, but this afternoon I went to the maester. He says it has only been a moon, but it's true." Rob exhaled sharply, his thoughts spinning. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her protectively as if shielding her from the world outside. The room felt too small, the fire too dim for the enormity of what they now faced. "Our child," he murmured, the words filled with both wonder and dread. Rosalind's hands clung to him, the weight of their reality pressing down on her. "What are we going to do, Rob?" "Joffrey won't hurt me whilst I carry the heir to the north, at least not physically but mentally." "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rosalind pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes, her brow furrowed. "Joffrey, he won't stop. He enjoys tormenting people, especially those he knows it will hurt. It isn't about me, he wants to hurt you." Her voice trembled with the weight of her fears. Rob took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. "I'll swear allegiance to him because I have to, but I swear to you I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. You, and our child." His gaze softened, though the weight of responsibility etched deep lines of worry into his face. "I never thought, not now, not like this. But we'll make this work," he said as he gently touched her belly. Rosalind nodded slowly, though uncertainty still clouded her expression. "I'll stay here. I trust you, Rob. I always have." She leaned into his chest, her fear momentarily eased by his warmth. "But promise me you'll be careful, promise you'll come back to me." He kissed the top of her head, resting his chin against her hair as he tightened his hold on her. "I swear it. I will come back to you and we will go home, all three of us." His voice was resolute, though inside, the storm of doubt and fear still churned. ________________________________________________________________________________ In the dead of night, a sudden, pounding on the chamber door jolted Rob from a restless sleep. He had struggled for hours to find any rest. Joffrey had delayed his father's release to the following morning. Every shadow seemed to whisper of betrayal, every creak in the floorboards a reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond the door. Beside him, Rosalind stirred but remained nestled in the thin covers, her breathing deep and steady, though he knew the constant stress had weighed heavily on her. She had always been a deeper sleeper than him, but even now, in the safety of their room, her brow creased slightly, as if she too could sense the trouble stirring in the darkness. The banging continued, insistent and unyielding, echoing through the silent corridors like an ominous drumbeat. Rob swung his legs out of the bed, the cold stone floor biting at his feet. He grabbed her old shirt and held it against his naked body, obscuring his member, and moved toward the door, every step cautious, every muscle tensed. The room was lit only by the dying wicks of candles that had been lit long ago. Rob glanced back at Rosalind, her dark hair spilling over the pillows, and for a moment, his heart tightened. He would protect her at all costs, but in a place like this, even protection felt like a fragile thing. As he reached the heavy wooden door, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the iron latch. His breath came slow and measured, his senses sharp, alert to any sound or sign of danger. He knew that a summons in the middle of the night could only mean one thing: trouble. Lord Stark, came a low, hurried voice from the doorway, barely more than a whisper in the stillness. "The king has summoned you." Rob moved swiftly, pulling on his clothes with deliberate haste, his movements tense. His mind raced ahead, already preparing for what awaited him. As he pulled on his boots, Rosalind stirred beside him, her sleep-addled confusion quickly giving way to alarm. She sat up, her hair spilling across her shoulders, eyes wide with concern as she tried to piece together what was happening. "Rob, will you please talk to me?" she asked, her voice thick with worry as she climbed out of bed. "What's going on?" "Joffrey wants to see me," Rob answered, his tone sharp, his mind clearly preoccupied. The tension in his voice spoke of more than mere annoyance, there was an edge of fear, panic creeping in around the edges. He paused, softening slightly as he turned to face her. "I'm sorry, my love, but I have to go." Rosalind didn't hesitate. She crossed the room in a few swift steps, pulling a dark grey nightdress from the wardrobe and fastening it around herself with determined grace. "Then I'm coming with you," she declared, her voice steady and resolute. "Rosalind, please," Rob began, reaching for her arm, his expression strained. "No, Rob," she cut him off, her tone firm as iron. "I am your wife, and tomorrow I will be the Lady of Winterfell. I will not sit idly by and wait for you, not this time." For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them heavy in the air. Rob's jaw tightened, torn between his need to protect her and the unyielding force of her will. He knew she was right, though the thought of exposing her to the dangers that lurked in Joffrey's presence made his chest tighten with dread. "Very well," he finally relented, his voice quieter now. "But stay close." They moved swiftly through the silent corridors of the keep, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The bustling activity of the previous day had vanished, leaving the halls eerily quiet, save for the occasional whisper of their own movements. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant creak of ancient timbers and the muted flicker of torchlight dancing on the walls. As they approached the great hall, Joffrey sat upon the Iron Throne, his posture rigid and uneasy. Unlike his earlier relaxed demeanor, he now appeared restless, his arm propped against his knee as he bounced his legs with a rapid, jittery rhythm. His attire was similar to Rob's but more elaborate, adorned with a heavy red velvet overcoat that gleamed in the torchlight. Standing beside him, Cersei loomed like a storm cloud. Her usually intricate hairstyle had been replaced by a single, thick braid that cascaded down her shoulder. Her sharp gaze cut through the dim light, burning with an intensity that was fixed unyieldingly on Rosalind, her expression a mask of disdain. Finally, between two stern members of the King's Guard stood a young boy. His appearance starkly contrasted with the opulence of the throne room. He was slight, no older than 10, and bore the threadbare clothes of flea bottom. His face, although covered in dirt, was pale and his eyes remained firmly fixed on the ground, his small frame trembling slightly as the guards held him upright. "Stark." Joffrey's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Though it was meant as a greeting, it felt more like an accusation. His gaze was fixed on Rob with a steely intensity, his expression betraying no hint of welcome. With a dismissive flick of his eyes, he shifted his attention to the woman standing beside Rob. "Lady Rosalind," he said, his tone softening ever so slightly, accompanied by a smirk that curled at the corners of his lips. "Your Grace," Rob responded evenly, his voice smooth as he sought to deflect Joffrey away from his wife. He took a step forward, his posture straight and composed. "What seems to be the matter at this late hour?" Joffrey rose abruptly from his throne, his movements sharp and agitated. He pointed a trembling finger toward the center of the room, where the young child stood, a look of indignation etched on his face. "This boy was caught causing trouble outside the keep's gates and... I've told you, I'm not a boy. I'm a girl." The child's voice, high and defiant, cut through Joffrey's tirade. The child spun around, their head snapping back with a fierce glare. It took Rob only a heartbeat to recognize the child's face beneath the grime and disheveled hair. Arya, his sister, standing there in the dim light, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. The realization hit him like a cold wave, the gravity of the situation suddenly clearer. Rob's heart pounded as he took in the sight of Arya, her small frame standing defiantly in the middle of the grand hall. His mind raced, grappling with the shock of seeing her here, in such a vulnerable state. He took a step forward, his eyes locking with Arya's, conveying a mix of surprise, concern, and relief. "Your Grace," Rob began, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of tension, "if I may speak candidly, I was under the impression that Arya had been confined to her rooms following my father's arrest. Forgive me if I am mistaken, but she does not appear to have been residing within the keep for the near 2 moons since his arrest was made. Before Joffrey could respond, Cersei interjected with a sharpness that cut through the conversation like a blade. After your father's arrest, this girl escaped from the Kingsguard and committed the heinous act of killing an innocent boy while fleeing the keep, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. We have been scouring the city for her tirelessly, day and night. So forgive us if we've woven a few tales to maintain some semblance of peace with you and Sansa. Joffrey's face twisted into a scowl. This child, he spat, clearly frustrated by Arya's defiance, was caught disrupting the peace. She's a murderer and will face punishment. Arya's gaze was unwavering as she met Joffrey's eyes, her small frame quivering slightly but her resolve unshaken. I was only trying to get food for myself, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of defiance and fear. I didn't mean any harm. Cersei, standing to Joffrey's side, watched with an unreadable expression. Her eyes flickered briefly to Robb, then back to Arya, a flicker of cold calculation in her gaze. Robb took another step forward, his face set in grim determination. Your Grace, Arya is under my protection. I ask that you release her to me. Whatever trouble she has caused, I will take responsibility. Joffrey's eyes narrowed, clearly displeased by the interference. You think to dictate terms in my court, Stark, he said, his voice laced with scorn. This child has no place here. Why should I grant you any leniency? Robb fixed Joffrey with a steely gaze, his jaw clenched in resolve. She is a child, Your Grace. You have taken from her everyone she has ever known and killed people she cared for in front of her. What did you expect her to do? A heavy silence settled over the room. Joffrey's expression grew even colder, but Robb's unwavering stance seemed to give him pause. Arya is a strong-willed child, at the best of times, but placing any child in such a dire situation and expecting a positive reaction is unjust. Tell me, Your Grace, how would your own sister have responded under similar circumstances? Do not speak of merciless, Cersei snapped, her voice laced with venom. Robb inclined his head respectfully. I apologize, Your Grace. It was not my intention to cause offense. What I am suggesting is that nearly 4 weeks of living on the streets of Flea Bottom should be punishment enough for any highborn lady. We should be grateful that Arya has shown the fortitude to survive in such harsh conditions. She should return to Winterfell with my mother and father as planned and take this opportunity to understand how grateful she should be to still be alive to tell the tale. Joffrey's face remained stern, though he seemed to wrestle with the decision. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Very well. I will permit her release into your custody. However, do not mistake this as the end of the matter. Should she cause any further trouble, either here or at Winterfell, it will be on your head, Stark. Robb nodded, struggling to conceal his relief. Joffrey rose abruptly and swept past Robb, pausing just long enough to press a fleeting kiss to Roslyn's hand. Cersei followed closely, her robes rustling as she exited. As the Kingsguard released Arya, she crumpled to the floor, her gaze fixed on the cold stone as she struggled to regain her footing. Once Joffrey and Cersei had departed, leaving a palpable silence in their wake, the Starks were left alone in the dimly lit hall. Robb turned to Arya, his face softening with concern. He stepped closer, his voice gentle and filled with worry. Are you all right, Arya? He asked, his eyes searching her face for any sign of distress. Arya nodded, her eyes still wary but a flicker of gratitude shining through. I'm fine. Just hungry and cold. Without another word, Robb took Arya's hand gently, guiding her towards Roslyn, who stood silently beside him, her face a mask of concern and support. The weight of the night's events hung heavy on them all as they began to leave the hall, the oppressive silence of the hall closing in on them. Chapter 12, Roslyn v. Chapter text. Roslyn v. Roslyn woke with the first light of dawn creeping across her face, the warmth and brightness of King's Landing still unfamiliar to her. Back in the Riverlands, the days were often cloaked in shadow, the skies grey and heavy with the threat of rain. The heat of the capital felt almost stifling, so unlike the damp cold that accompanied the long winters of her home. She reached across the bed instinctively, her hand brushing over the empty space where Robb should have been. As usual, he was already gone. It had become their silent routine. He would rise before her, and more often than not, she would wake to find him watching her, his quiet presence a comfort she had come to cherish. Pushing back the covers, Rosalind gently eased herself out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cool stone floor. Rob was nowhere to be seen, but she wasn't alarmed. He was likely with their guards or checking on Sansa and Arya. Today was the day Eddard Stark would be released from the Black Cells and publicly swear his loyalty to King Joffrey. The entire city would gather to witness the event, and Joffrey had demanded the presence of the entire Stark household. Rosalind crossed the room and paused in front of the tall mirror that hung in the corner, studying her reflection. She had always been small, slight in frame, and delicate in her figure. But now, something had changed. There was a fire in her eyes, a quiet strength she had never seen before. No longer the timid girl who had been raised in the shadow of the twins, she had become a woman, a lady. The Lady of Winterfell. She was the wolf's wife, and inside her, their child grew. Turning to the side, she ran her hand gently across her still flat stomach. There was no sign of the life within her yet, no visible swell to announce the child's presence to the world. But she knew. She could feel it, a quiet, steadfast strength, just like Rob's. Their child. A Stark of Winterfell. And in that moment, she felt not fear, but resolve. Whatever trials lay ahead, she would face them. In the stillness of their chambers, Rosalind spoke softly to the child growing within her, her hands resting protectively on her stomach as if cradling the life that lay beneath. She stroked her belly with slow, tender movements, her voice barely a whisper. "Your father is a great man, little one. The greatest I have ever known. And he will protect us, I know it." Her words were filled with quiet conviction, though she was speaking more to herself than anyone else. These were the moments she cherished, the rare moments of peace and solitude that had become so fleeting since their arrival in King's Landing. It was the first time she had felt true calm since the journey south, when it had been just her and Rob, alone in the privacy of their tent. With a deep breath, she rose to prepare herself for the day ahead. A maid entered, Fee, a sweet girl with a warm smile who had been assigned to her by the king's household. She could not have been more than a few years younger than Rosalind herself, and though she was gentle and kind, Rosalind remained wary. In King's Landing, even the softest face could belong to a spy. And though Fee served with quiet devotion, Rosalind knew better than to trust a girl on the Lannisters' payroll. Fee helped her tie her hair in the southern style, weaving it intricately as was the custom. Rosalind's gown, one of the many made for her following her journey into the city, was a soft grey, adorned with silver and black embroidery. Ornate patterns wound their way up the bodice and down her sleeves. She studied her reflection in the mirror, her fingers tracing the embroidered designs. For a brief moment, her thoughts drifted to her mother. She wondered what her mother had felt when she discovered she was carrying her. Was it joy? Or fear? Had she cried? Had she wanted another son? Did she know the life of duty and expectation that awaited her child if it was a daughter? Rosalind's gaze lingered on the reflection of her own face, searching for answers in the silence of the room. "Thank you, Fee," she said at last, her voice soft, almost a murmur. "You may go now." The girl curtsied and quietly left the room, leaving Rosalind once again alone with her thoughts. Rosalind left her chambers and made her way to the room that had been given to Arya the previous night. The corridors were busy, with many people moving from place to place. When she reached Arya's door, she pushed it open without knocking, feeling no need for formalities. Inside, two maids were struggling to get Arya into the bath they had drawn for her. The young girl resisted, squirming away from their attempts as if the water were an enemy. At the sound of the door opening, the maids immediately paused, releasing Arya as they turned to face Rosalind. They dropped into quick, nervous curtsies. "Lady Stark," they greeted in unison. Rosalind offered them a gentle smile. "Thank you both," she said, her tone kind but firm, "but I can bathe the Lady Arya myself." The maids exchanged uncertain glances, silently seeking reassurance from one another before nodding and hurrying out of the room, leaving the two Stark women alone. Arya stood beside the bath, glaring at the water as if it had insulted her. Rosalind moved closer, picking up a scrubbing brush and holding it out to her. "Get as much of the dirt off as you can yourself," she said, her voice soft but practical. "And I'll help with any parts you miss." Arya took the scrubbing brush, eyeing Rosalind with a mixture of suspicion and defiance, but there was a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. She stepped cautiously into the bath, the water sloshing gently around her ankles as she lowered herself in. Rosalind watched quietly, giving her space but remaining close enough to offer comfort. The bath water quickly turned murky, evidence of Arya's weeks on the streets. For a few moments, the room was silent except for the sound of Arya scrubbing her skin with determined force, her movements quick and a little rough. Rosalind could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she bit her lip as if holding back anger, fear, or both. "You don't have to be so rough," Rosalind said gently, stepping forward. "The dirt will come off without a fight." Arya glanced at her, then at the brush in her hand. She slowed her motions, though her expression remained tight, her lips pressed together in a stubborn line. After a few more moments of silence, Arya spoke, her voice quiet but laced with frustration. "I don't need your help, you know. I've done this before." Rosalind knelt beside the tub, resting her arms on the edge. "I know," she replied softly. "You've been incredibly brave, Arya. Surviving out there on your own. It takes strength. But you don't have to do everything by yourself anymore. We're family, and we look after each other." Arya's scrubbing slowed further, her fingers loosening their grip on the brush. She didn't say anything, but Rosalind could see the weight of the past few weeks in her eyes, the fear, the loss, the loneliness. Rosalind reached for a small cloth, dipping it into the water. "Let me help with your hair," she offered, her tone soothing as she moved behind Arya, gently wringing the cloth over the tangled mess. She began to work through the knots with careful fingers, speaking softly to distract her. "You've always been strong. On our journey here Rob told me stories about you. He's proud of you, you know." Arya said nothing, but her shoulders seemed to relax ever so slightly under Rosalind's gentle touch. Rosalind continued to work quietly, the only sound the soft ripple of water. After a few more moments, she spoke again, her voice tender. "I don't know what's going to happen next, Arya. But I promise you, whatever comes, we'll face it together. You, me, Rob, and Sansa. We're family, and that's what matters most." Arya's hands stilled in the water, her defiance fading into something more vulnerable. She turned her head slightly, looking back at Rosalind with eyes that, despite everything, were still the eyes of a child searching for reassurance. For a moment, she hesitated, then nodded, the faintest glimmer of trust breaking through the hardness that had built up in her over the past weeks. Rosalind smiled, the warmth of it softening her features. "Good," she said quietly, continuing to comb through Arya's hair with gentle hands. "We'll get through this. All of us." Once Rosalind was satisfied that Arya was clean, she helped her out of the bath, wrapping a soft cloth around her to shield her modesty. She gave Arya a moment to dry herself, then gestured toward the vanity where Arya could sit once dressed in her simple underdress. Rosalind picked up a brush and began gently running it through Arya's short, uneven hair. Most of the knots had come loose in the bath, but a few stubborn tangles remained. As Rosalind worked through them with care, Arya winced but didn't complain. The girl's hair, hastily cut, barely reached her shoulders. Rosalind's brush moved slower over the worst tangles, and she smiled softly, trying to ease the tension in the room. "You remind me of my niece back at the Twins, Alex, she said. She isn't as fierce as you, but I see the same fire in her eyes. The same strength." Arya glanced at Rosalind in the mirror. "Do you miss them? Your family?" Rosalind paused for a moment, thinking. "Sometimes," she replied, her voice honest. "There are moments when I wish I could tell my brother something, or ask my sister for advice. But," she trailed off, realizing that her hand had stilled, lost in the memories of her childhood. "My family wasn't like yours, Arya. It wasn't loving." Arya sat quietly, her face thoughtful, before she spoke, her voice small. "Sometimes, I think I don't love my family." She paused, her words heavy with guilt. "When father wouldn't let me fight like Bran, or when Sansa made fun of me for being different. I would get so angry. I'd think I hated them all. But when I was out there, on the streets, all I wanted was for them to find me. To hold me. To tell me everything was going to be okay." Her voice cracked, and before Rosalind could respond, tears began streaming down Arya's cheeks. Rosalind set the brush down immediately, her heart aching at the sight of the young girl's pain. She moved closer, gently wrapping her arms around Arya's small, trembling frame. "It's all right," Rosalind whispered, holding her tightly. "It's all right to feel like that, Arya. You've been through so much. But your family loves you, just as you love them. Sometimes, we say or think things we don't mean, especially when we're hurt or scared." Arya buried her face in Rosalind's shoulder, the sobs quiet but powerful. Rosalind stroked her hair, offering silent comfort as the girl finally let herself cry. "We're going to get through this," Rosalind murmured, her voice soft and steady. "You're not alone anymore. We're here, and we'll keep you safe. Robb will keep you safe." Arya nodded weakly, her tears slowing as Rosalind continued to hold her. The room was filled with a tender silence, broken only by the occasional sniffle, as Arya allowed herself to lean into Rosalind's embrace. For the first time in weeks, Arya let go of the weight she'd been carrying, if only